The weight of the rucksack on Jackson Hayes' back was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. 12 years in Delta Force, he had carried heavier things before. Gear, ammunition, the bodies of brothers who didn't make it home. But none of it compared to the invisible burden he bore now as he stood with Sophia, his 10-year-old daughter, at the edge of a driveway that gleamed like polished marble beneath his worn boots. Before them stood not a house, but a museum, sprawling brick white columns, ivy trimmed like topiary art, and a circular driveway lined with German sedans and gleaming SUVs. Inside, laughter rippled like glass, the brittle kind that cracked under pressure. Vanessa's party wasn't for anything, not really. Just something her family did to remind themselves they were above it all. Jackson adjusted the strap on his shoulder and looked down at the small hand wrapped in his own. Sophia, already too quiet for a child, was looking up at him, not with questions, but with faith. Behind them, the heavy iron gate closed with a creak. A man filmed it on his phone. Delta Force veteran loses everything for custody, he whispered into the microphone. No one knows they're walking into the biggest secret since Watergate. The air smelled of roses, chlorine, and too much money. The garden party was in full bloom. Men in linen jackets, women in pastel dresses that cost more than Jackson's entire wardrobe. Crystal glasses clinked. A string quartet played a forgettable Vivaldi piece. Servers floated by with trays of canapes and champagne. They saw him before the gate even closed behind him. Heads turned, conversation faltered, and laughter shrank into murmurs. Vanessa was seated beneath a canopy with her sisters, her parents, and a circle of people who never had to choose between food and dignity. Her sunglasses were perched in her perfectly highlighted hair, and her lips curled into that familiar smile, the one that said, "You don't belong here, but I'll pretend for the cameras." She didn't rise. She didn't even blink. Instead, she tilted her head like an actress hitting her mark. "You're early." Jackson said nothing. He reached into his coat and pulled out the manila envelope. He stepped forward, placing it gently on the table before her. A court order, sealed and notarized. It gave him full legal custody of Sophia. He had given up everything to get it. The house they once shared, the savings, even the car. She'd wanted it all, and the lawyers, hers, had been ruthless. But there was one thing he refused to relinquish. His daughter. Vanessa's eyes didn't even flicker. She picked up the envelope delicately, glanced at it, and passed it to the man beside her, her family's lawyer. Around them, the hum of the party shifted, soured. Her cousin leaned in and muttered something about that dump on the hill. Another guest chuckled. Someone took out their phone. "He's really going to raise her there," Vanessa said, not to Jackson, but to her audience. In that mildew-soaked shack Raymond left behind. Jackson didn't react. The words weren't for him. They were theater for the audience, for her ego. He looked down at Sophia, who was staring at her mother, eyes wide, mouth closed. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "let's go home." He turned and Sophia followed. No fireworks, no screaming, just the quiet sound of two pairs of feet walking away, back toward a beat-up pickup parked awkwardly on the edge of the pristine cul-de-sac. They passed the laughter. They passed the whispers. The judgment weighed on them like summer heat. But Sophia held his hand tighter, and that was enough. A man filmed it on his phone, a veteran walking away from a woman like Vanessa. The clip hit social media within hours. Disgraced Delta Force hero snatches daughter at socialite party. A few called it heartbreaking, most called it pathetic. But Jackson didn't read the comments. He was driving and the road was long. The pickup sputtered as it climbed the narrow road out of town. Civilization thinned. Streetlights vanished. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to dirt. Trees pressed in from all sides like they were trying to keep secrets. The map said the land was still his, inherited from Raymond Wells, the uncle no one ever mentioned unless it was to tell Jackson to stay away. No one had lived there in decades. The sky grew darker, not just from dusk, but from the weight of clouds rolling in like an approaching tide. Rain whispered against the windshield as they crested the final hill and saw the house for the first time. It wasn't a house, it was a corpse. The old manor sagged like it was bowing under its own shame. Windows were broken or boarded up. The roof leaned at strange angles. Ivy wrapped around the porch like ropes around a sinking ship. The mailbox hung by a single rusted hinge, its nameplate faded to illegibility. A wind chime made of bent silverware clinked eerily in the wind. Sophia didn't speak. She just stared. Jackson turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immense. They stepped out into the tall grass, shoulder high in places. The front gate groaned as he pushed it open. The porch creaked beneath their feet, one board snapping completely under his weight. The key turned with effort, and the door opened with a long shudder and moan. Inside, the air was thick with dust, mold, and something older, something sad. Furniture lay in piles, broken and rotting. Shelves collapsed in on themselves. Wallpaper peeled like skin from the bones of the house, and the smell, rot and mildew, soaked into everything. He found a room with a fireplace, cleared space for 2 sleeping bags. There was no power, no water, just the sound of the storm growing stronger outside. He started a fire with old newspaper and a broken chair leg. It barely lit. Sophia sat silently, hugging her knees. "This is home now," he said, mostly to himself. She didn't answer. She was watching the shadows the fire made on the walls. They flickered and danced like they were trying to speak. That night, Jackson lay awake, listening to the house breathe. It groaned and shifted. Wind slipped through cracks in the walls like fingers probing an open wound. The floor above them creaked when no one walked it. He thought of Vanessa's smile, of the laughter, of the way she looked at Sophia like an accessory she could live without. He thought of the deal he made. Everything gone, traded for one thing, the chance to be a father. The storm raged, the fire hissed. His daughter slept, curled beside him, safe in a place the world had discarded. He closed his eyes. He'd been through worse. But he had never felt more alone, and the house, old and hollow, seemed to whisper back, "You're not alone here." And Jackson Hayes, who had survived war and betrayal, began to wonder what kind of battle he had just walked into. Morning came not with sunlight, but with a pale gray haze seeping through cracks in the boards nailed haphazardly over the windows. The fire had long since died out, leaving only the acrid scent of charred wood and cold ash hanging in the air. Jackson stirred before Sophia, his back stiff from the hard floor, his joints aching in ways they hadn't since combat. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then the mildew, the stillness, the oppressive quiet of forgotten walls reminded him. The house hadn't shifted in the night, yet it felt different, heavier somehow, as if it had taken note of its new occupants and was waiting. Jackson moved slowly, not to wake Sophia. She lay curled in the sleeping bag, one hand clutching a worn stuffed bear he hadn't even noticed her take from Vanessa's house. It looked as out of place here as she did. Bright, soft, loved. Nothing else in this place had been touched with care in decades. He opened the front door and stepped outside into the overgrown yard. The sky threatened more rain, but for now the air was still. The grass reached nearly to his waist in places, a chaotic jungle of weeds and wildflowers long uncut. Vines climbed the walls of the house like hungry fingers, threading through cracks and pulling at shutters. Everything about this place screamed, "Stay away!" But to Jackson, it was the only refuge left. He spent the next few hours taking stock. The porch was barely stable. The roof was missing shingles and sloped where water had eaten through the rafters. Inside, 3 of the downstairs rooms were unusable due to mold or structural decay. The kitchen smelled of long dead mice and damp. The refrigerator stood like a ghost of modern life, unplugged, its door slightly ajar, and covered in a fine green fuzz. The pantry shelves had collapsed in on themselves, scattering rusted cans and broken glass across the floor. Still, there was something underneath it all. Beneath the filth and rot, Jackson sensed bones. Real structure waiting to be uncovered. The house wasn't evil, just abandoned. Like him. By noon, Sophia had woken quietly without a complaint. She stood in the doorway to the ruined dining room, barefoot, arms wrapped around herself. "Do we have breakfast?" Jackson smiled as gently as he could. "We have peanut butter, crackers, and bottled water." She nodded solemnly like a soldier accepting rations. They ate on an overturned crate in what once had been a study, surrounded by decaying books and toppled chairs. Sophia said little, but she watched him closely, like she was trying to see not just what he was doing, but why. After the meal, she wandered off with her bear and disappeared into one of the less damaged rooms. Jackson continued working. He pried open stuck windows, let the air circulate. He found an old broom and began sweeping layer after layer of dust, revealing warped floorboards and torn rugs. It was slow, thankless work, but it gave him purpose. He could fix this. Maybe not all at once, maybe not completely, but enough to make it theirs. He found an old toolbox in what used to be a laundry room. The tools were rusted but usable. He spent the afternoon clearing debris from the stairs and checking the second floor. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, all in varying states of decay. The smallest room, barely more than a closet, seemed the least damaged. He set about clearing it for Sophia. It had a single window, which he managed to pry open, letting in a thin stream of natural light. When he brought her up to see it, she didn't say much. She just nodded, then sat on the floor with her bear in her lap. A few minutes later, she began rearranging the leftover junk in the room, placing a crate as a makeshift nightstand, setting a broken lamp upright, dusting a windowsill with the sleeve of her oversized shirt. Jackson watched from the doorway. She didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders relaxed, and that was enough. Later, they explored more of the house together. The library, as they had started calling it, was the largest room on the first floor. It had once been grand, clearly 2-story shelves, a rolling ladder, a massive fireplace flanked by old portraits whose faces had faded into anonymity. Most of the books were too water-damaged to salvage, their spines crumbling at the touch. But a few shelves, oddly, had been spared, as if someone had protected them. Sophia was fascinated. She pulled down titles with reverence, running her fingers over embossed covers and flipping through yellowed pages like they held secrets. She found a copy of Treasure Island and hugged it like a lost pet. Jackson, meanwhile, noticed something else. The layout of the room was strange. One wall had a slight bulge, as if something was behind it. A draft came through a thin seam between 2 bookshelves. It wasn't enough to warrant action yet, but it stuck with him. That night, they had soup heated on a portable stove. They ate by candlelight in the library, their breath visible in the cold. The wind howled outside, but the thick stone walls muffled it. The house didn't creak tonight. It sat in silence, listening. As they finished dinner, Sophia spoke, her voice barely louder than the candle's flame. "Do you think he was lonely?" Jackson looked up. "Who?" "Uncle Raymond." Jackson considered. He'd never met the man. The family had only spoken of him in half-truths, warnings, and dismissals. A recluse, a failure, a madman. But the house, this house, felt like it had once been alive. Someone had built it to matter. "Maybe," Jackson said, "maybe he just didn't like the world he was born into." Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied. They curled up in their sleeping bags in front of the fireplace. The candle burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. Jackson didn't sleep for a long time. He listened to Sophia's breathing. He listened to the wind. And somewhere deep inside the house, he thought he heard something else. Not footsteps, not voices. A vibration almost, like the house was waking up slowly from a long and troubled sleep. The next morning was colder. They woke to frost on the inside of the windows. Jackson built a stronger fire and hung a tarp over the broken window in the hallway. Sophia stayed bundled in blankets but remained cheerful. They spent the morning cleaning out the kitchen. Under a collapsed cabinet, Jackson found a photograph in a cracked frame. A young man, dark-skinned, tall, in military uniform, clearly Raymond decades earlier. He looked like Jackson, the same jaw, same eyes, but there was something in his expression, a quiet defiance, maybe even a dare. He showed it to Sophia. She stared at it for a long time. "He looks kind," she said. That wasn't the word anyone in the family had ever used, but Jackson agreed. By afternoon, they found an old writing desk in the upstairs hallway. It had been jammed shut, its wood swollen with moisture. Jackson wrestled with it until it gave way, revealing a stack of brittle papers, a leather-bound journal, and strangely, a small key wrapped in oilcloth. The journal belonged to Raymond. The entries were scattered, erratic. Some were just lists of words. Others were passages about time, about betrayal, about value. One line repeated itself several times. What is hidden is only for the one who dares to stay. Sophia copied the line into her own notebook. By the end of the second full day in the house, something had shifted between them. They still had nothing. No comfort, no safety net, but they were together. And the house, once a prison of rot and shame, had become something else. Not a home, not yet, but a possibility. As they sat in front of the fire that night, wrapped in blankets, Sophia whispered, "Thank you for choosing me over everything else." Jackson looked at her, his throat tight. He didn't reply. There was no need. The house answered for him. A board creaked overhead. A draft moved through the room. And in the library behind the seam in the bookshelves, something waited. Something that had been locked away for decades. Something that knew they had finally come. Days passed slowly, each one folding into the next like worn pages of an old book, weathered and unread for far too long. Outside, the landscape remained still beneath the cloudy Vermont sky. The grass swayed gently in the wind, wild and free, as if the earth had forgotten what it meant to be tamed. Inside the house, Jackson and Sophia moved through dust and ruin like ghosts determined to carve out space for the living. There was no heat, no comfort, and very little hope. Yet in the flicker of candlelight, in the clatter of makeshift meals and soft laughter, something began to shift. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was the beginning of belonging. Sophia had claimed the smallest upstairs bedroom as her own. The ceiling still sagged from water damage, and a strange smell lingered in the corners, but she seemed undeterred. She lined up books along the windowsill, placed her worn bear on the crate beside her bedroll, and arranged pebbles and pine cones in neat circles around the floor as if warding off by some unseen presence. Jackson watched her with a mix of awe and guilt. Children had an uncanny ability to adapt, to find rhythm in chaos, but he knew she deserved more than adaptation. She deserved security, a life, a future. Each morning, Jackson rose before dawn and began to work. He hauled away rotted wood, reinforced sagging beams, patched holes in the walls with salvaged planks. His hands cracked from cold and overuse, knuckles bruised and bleeding. He found a kind of peace in the rhythm of labor. In war, motion had meant survival. Here, it meant the illusion of control. They had no internet, no television, no phone reception. Their only link to the world outside was an old radio that sputtered to life on rare occasions when the wind hit the antenna just right. It was on that radio one chilly morning that Jackson caught a snippet of a news broadcast. Someone had uploaded the video of him leaving Vanessa's estate with Sophia. The world now knew the story. Veteran walks away with daughter from socialite garden party. The tone was mocking. The clip had gone viral. Jackson turned the radio off and didn't mention it to Sophia. Instead, he focused on the house. Or rather, the house began to focus on him. It started subtly, a soft knock when no one was near, a door easing open in the dead of night, books that fell from shelves without a breeze. At first, Jackson dismissed it as the natural creaks of a neglected structure, but there was something too intense about it, too rhythmic. The house was not collapsing. It was stirring. One evening after cleaning the storage room behind the kitchen, Jackson found himself drawn back to the library. The seam between the bookshelves was clearer now, the gap more pronounced. He ran his fingers along the molding and felt a faint draft, a whisper of air where there should be none. He pressed gently, expecting nothing, and was surprised when one of the panels shifted beneath his hand. He paused, listening. The house held its breath. Behind him, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and her bear tucked under one elbow. "You found something, didn't you?" Jackson nodded slowly. He motioned for her to stay back and press the panel again. It groaned, then slid aside with a reluctant scrape, revealing a narrow hidden room. They stared at it together. No words, only the sense that they were looking at something not meant to be found, or perhaps meant only for them. Jackson retrieved a lantern and tested the first step inside. The floor held. He looked back at Sophia, who stood silently, her eyes wide but unafraid. "I'm coming too," she said simply. The hidden room wasn't large, perhaps 10 feet square, with a desk at its center covered in papers, maps, and what looked like newspaper clippings. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, some closed, others with drawers hanging open as if someone had left in a hurry. Jackson swept the lantern across the room, its light catching on dust motes that swirled like miniature galaxies. On the far wall hung a large corkboard covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting them in a complex web. "What is all this?" Sophia whispered, moving to the desk. Jackson approached the corkboard, studying the photographs. They showed men in suits, government buildings, what looked like surveillance photos. The center of the board was dominated by a newspaper headline, "Watergate Scandal Rocks White House." I think, I think your Uncle Raymond was involved in Watergate," Jackson said slowly, examining the photos more closely. One photo showed a group of men standing outside what appeared to be a courthouse. Jackson recognized some faces from history books, prosecutors, journalists from the Watergate investigation. And there, at the edge of the frame, was Raymond, younger but unmistakable, wearing a military intelligence uniform. "What's Watergate?" Sophia asked, picking up a folder from the desk. It was a political scandal in the 1970s. President Nixon's administration broke into the Democratic Party's headquarters. It eventually led to Nixon's resignation. Jackson continued examining the board. Something wasn't right. He'd studied American history, knew the major players in Watergate. Raymond wasn't among them. Yet here he was, in photos that looked official, standing alongside key figures. Sophia had opened the folder and was flipping through its contents. "Dad, look at this." She handed him a document. It was a military intelligence report, heavily redacted, but with Raymond's signature at the bottom. The header read, "Supplemental Findings, Operation Nightshade." Below it was a handwritten note. "They removed me from the official record. They can't erase what I know." Jackson felt something cold settle in his stomach. He turned back to the corkboard and noticed something he'd missed. Several of the photographs had been altered. Official versions with Raymond cropped out, adjacent to the originals where he was clearly present. "Someone erased him from history," Jackson murmured. He picked up another document, this one bearing government seals he recognized from his military days. It was a personnel file for Raymond Wells, with a red stamp across it, "Clearance revoked, subject unstable." "They called him crazy," Sophia said quietly, reading over his shoulder. "Like they called you crazy." Jackson looked at her sharply. "Who called me crazy?" She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Mom showed me this. She said I shouldn't be with you because you came back different." It was a psychological evaluation from Jackson's last deployment, recommending extended leave for combat stress, something that should have been private, protected. She said Uncle Raymond was the same way. That's why no one talked about him. Jackson carefully returned the paper to her, then looked around the room with new eyes. This wasn't just a study, it was a war room. Raymond hadn't been crazy, he'd been silenced. "I think," Jackson said slowly, "your Uncle Raymond knew something important, something people wanted to stay hidden. Is that why he left you the house? Because you'd understand?" Jackson didn't have an answer, but as they continued exploring the room, finding more documents, more connections, more evidence of Raymond's erased role in one of America's most significant political scandals, he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled into something much larger than an inheritance. They spent hours in the hidden room, sorting through papers, organizing documents, trying to piece together Raymond's story. The more they discovered, the more questions emerged. Raymond had been part of a military intelligence team assigned to investigate aspects of the Watergate break-in, but his findings had somehow gone beyond the official narrative. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they returned to the library, bringing key documents with them. As Sophia drifted to sleep by the fire, Jackson stayed awake, poring over Raymond's journal by lantern light. One entry stood out. 3 keys guard the truth, one in plain sight, one where memories sleep, one where support fails. Only when all 3 are found will the final door open. I trust that whoever finds this house, whoever stays despite its condition, will be the right person to receive what I've protected all these years. Jackson looked up from the journal and gazed around the library. The house suddenly felt different. Not just a shelter, but a puzzle box containing secrets waiting to be unlocked. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But for the first time since they'd arrived, the sound didn't feel threatening. It felt like encouragement. The next morning, Jackson woke with a new sense of purpose. He nudged Sophia gently. I think we need to find 3 keys. She blinked sleepily, then sat up, immediately alert. Like a treasure hunt? Exactly like a treasure hunt. They spent the day searching the house with renewed energy, interpreting Raymond's cryptic clues. One in plain sight led them to examine every portrait, mirror, and decorative element. By mid-afternoon, Sophia spotted something unusual about a large painting in the dining room, a portrait of a woman whose face had faded to near obscurity. The frame is different from the others, she noted, standing on tiptoes to examine it. Jackson carefully removed the painting from the wall, revealing a small compartment behind it. Inside lay a rusted key with the number 1 etched into the head. You found it, Jackson said, lifting Sophia up to see their discovery. She beamed with pride, the first genuine smile he'd seen since they'd arrived. They placed the key in a shoebox they'd repurposed for their findings. The second clue, where memories sleep, proved more challenging. They searched bedrooms, examining mattresses and pillows without success. It wasn't until Sophia wondered aloud if memories could be stored in other ways that Jackson thought of the attic. Accessing it required building a makeshift ladder from salvaged wood. The space was filled with trunks, boxes, and furniture draped in sheets like ghosts. They worked methodically, opening containers and examining contents. Hours passed until Sophia called out from behind a stack of hat boxes. She'd found an old music box. When open, it played a tinny version of Moonlight Sonata. Beneath the turning mechanism, hidden in a false bottom, lay the second key, wrapped in wax paper, with 2 engraved on its handle. 2 down, 1 to go. Where support fails, Jackson muttered, considering the final clue as they made their way back downstairs. What supports a house? The foundation? Sophia suggested. Or the walls, the beams? Jackson's eyes drifted to the staircase they were descending. The structure. He ran his hand along the banister, feeling for inconsistencies. At the bottom of the stairs, the newel post wobbled slightly. It shouldn't have. These were solid oak posts designed to anchor the entire staircase. Working carefully with tools from his found toolkit, Jackson dismantled the post. Inside the hollow center, tucked into a small metal tube, was the third key. Like the others, it bore a number. 3. As they placed it with the others, a strange sense of accomplishment washed over them. It wasn't just about finding objects. It was about connecting with Raymond, understanding his mind, following the breadcrumbs he'd left specifically for someone who would take the time to look. What do we do now? Sophia asked, looking at the 3 keys lying side by side in their shoebox. We find what they open, Jackson replied. They returned to the hidden room behind the library, examining it more thoroughly. The filing cabinets yielded more documents, military reports, news clippings, personal letters, but no obvious locks for their keys. It was when Jackson moved the desk slightly that they heard it, a hollow sound beneath the floorboards. Kneeling down, he ran his fingers along the edges of the planks until he found one that moved. Carefully, he pried it up, revealing a wooden hatch embedded in the floor beneath. The hatch was secured with 3 padlocks, each engraved with a Roman numeral, I-2, 3. Jackson looked at Sophia. She didn't say a word. She just handed him the box of keys. One by one they fit. One by one the locks opened with a heavy metallic click, releasing tension that neither of them knew they had been carrying. Beneath the hatch was darkness. Jackson shone the lantern down, revealing a small chamber, and within it, a large metal trunk, old but in remarkably good condition. It was locked with a combination dial. How do we open it? Sophia whispered. Jackson examined the trunk carefully, then noticed an envelope attached to its side. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a sequence of numbers. 177653. The year of the Declaration of Independence, Jackson said. And I'm not sure about the 53. The year Raymond was born, Sophia said quietly. It was on the back of his photo, 1953. Jackson tried the combination. The lock clicked open. Inside the trunk, they found not gold or jewels, but something potentially more valuable. Folders upon folders of documents, photographs, audio reels, and what appeared to be microfilm canisters. On top lay a sealed envelope addressed simply to the inheritor. Jackson opened it with trembling fingers and read aloud, "If you're reading this, you've chosen to stay. The house has tested you and you've passed. What you've found isn't just history, it's truth. During my investigation into Watergate, I discovered something deeper, something few know even today. The break-in wasn't just about political espionage. It was about covering up a network of officials selling state secrets to foreign powers. When I presented my findings, I was discredited, labeled unstable, erased from the record. They took my career, my reputation, but they couldn't take what I knew. Everything is here. Names, dates, evidence. Use it wisely. The truth doesn't expire." Raymond Wells, Captain, U.S. Military Intelligence Corps. Jackson sat back, the letter still in his hand. This wasn't just family history. This was American history, buried and forgotten. "Dad?" Sophia's voice was small. "Are we in danger?" He looked at his daughter, suddenly aware of the weight of what they'd discovered. The question wasn't irrational. If Raymond had been silenced for what he knew, what would happen to those who unearthed his secrets decades later? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I think this is why Raymond left us the house. He trusted us to make the right decision about this." "What is the right decision?" Jackson carefully replaced the documents in the trunk, his mind racing. This wasn't a treasure to be spent or displayed. It was a responsibility. "For now, we keep this between us. We learn more. We understand what Raymond found before we decide what to do with it." They secured the trunk, replaced the floorboards, and closed the hidden room. By unspoken agreement, they didn't discuss their discovery further that evening. Instead, they prepared a simple dinner and sat by the fire, each lost in thought. As Sophia drifted off to sleep, Jackson remained awake, contemplating the enormity of what they'd found. Raymond hadn't been a recluse or a madman. He'd been a patriot, silenced for his loyalty to the truth rather than to power. And now, somehow, that burden had passed to Jackson. Outside, a car's headlights swept across the overgrown drive, lingering longer than any passing vehicle would. Jackson moved to the window cautiously, peering through a crack in the boards. A black SUV idled at the edge of the property, its engine cutting through the night silence. Then, just as mysteriously as it had appeared, it pulled away, disappearing down the road. Someone was watching. The question was, who? The black SUV returned the following morning, moving slowly up the gravel driveway like a predator stalking prey. Jackson watched from behind a partially boarded window, his body instinctively shifting into the defensive posture that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. The vehicle stopped short of the house, its tinted windows revealing nothing of whoever sat inside. After a long moment, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wearing a tailored overcoat that seemed out of place in the rural Vermont setting. He surveyed the house with clinical detachment, then reached back into the car for a leather portfolio. His movements were measured, deliberate. Military training or law enforcement. Jackson recognized the bearing immediately. The man approached the house, careful to avoid the deeper puddles left by last night's rain. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, studying the rotting wood as if calculating risk. "Mr. Hayes, Jackson Hayes, my name is Frank Warren. I'm a friend of Raymond's." Jackson said nothing, watching through the window, noting the careful way the man held himself. No visible weapon, but that meant nothing. "I know you're in there, son. I'm not here to make trouble, just to talk." Sophia appeared at Jackson's elbow, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Should we let him in?" Jackson hesitated. After last night's discovery, trust felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. But if this man truly knew Raymond— "Stay behind me," he whispered to Sophia. "If I say run, you go to the hidden room and lock yourself in. Understand?" She nodded solemnly. Jackson opened the door just enough to see through, keeping his body positioned to block any attempt to push inside. Up close, the man looked less threatening, deep crow's feet around tired eyes, a face weathered by years rather than hardened by intent. "How did you know Raymond?" The man, Frank, smiled slightly. "Joint Services Intelligence. Vietnam, initially. Later, other operations. Your uncle was one of the best analysts the military ever had." "Raymond wasn't my uncle," Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. No, that's what he always said. That's what everyone always said. Doesn't make it true. Frank nodded slowly. Fair enough. May I come in? It's getting cold out here and my knees aren't what they used to be. Jackson considered, then opened the door wider, motioning the man inside but positioning himself between the visitor and Sophia. The library was the only room presentable enough for a guest. Frank settled into a worn armchair, glancing around with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. He loved this place, you know. Could have lived anywhere, but he chose here, away from the noise. You seem to know a lot about a man most people called a recluse. Frank reached into his portfolio and extracted a photograph. Faded, creased down the middle, but clear enough. Two young men in military dress uniform standing before a nondescript building, arms around each other's shoulders. One was unmistakably Raymond. The other was Frank, decades younger. Worked together for 20 years, mostly intelligence analysis, but some field work when needed. Raymond had a mind like a steel trap, could see patterns where the rest of us saw chaos. Jackson took the photo, examining it carefully. Why are you here now? Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because things are starting to move. People are starting to ask questions about this place, about you. The video of you and your daughter leaving that garden party went viral. Someone connected you to Raymond, and now certain individuals are very interested in what might be here. What would be here? Frank's eyes met Jackson's directly. Don't play dumb, son. It doesn't suit you. Raymond left you this house for a reason. If you've been here more than a day, you've started finding things. Sophia stepped forward, ignoring Jackson's earlier instruction. You mean the hidden room? And the 3 keys? Jackson shot her a warning glance, but Frank merely smiled. Clever girl, just like your father. His gaze shifted back to Jackson. Raymond kept things, important things, documentation, evidence, materials that could still cause considerable discomfort to people in positions of power. Related to Watergate? Watergate was just the visible part of the iceberg, son. What sank the ship was what lay beneath. Jackson's military training screamed caution, but something about the old man's demeanor suggested genuineness. Who are these people suddenly interested in this place? Some are government, intelligence community, federal law enforcement. Others represent private interests with connections to the events Raymond documented. They've been content to let sleeping dogs lie for decades, but your arrival has stirred things up. Why would they care about me? I'm just a washed-up Delta operator with custody issues. Frank chuckled dryly. A washed-up operator who happens to be one of the most decorated combat veterans of his generation, with top-secret clearance and a reputation for moral inflexibility. You're exactly the type of person Raymond would trust with his legacy. Jackson absorbed this, glancing at Sophia, who was listening with intense concentration. What do they think I'm going to do, go public with decade-old government secrets? They don't know what you'll do. That's what frightens them. Frank shifted, wincing slightly as his knee cracked. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here because I owed Raymond, and warning you is the least I can do. Be careful. Trust no one who suddenly takes an interest in this place. And whatever you found, whatever Raymond left, understand its true value before you decide its fate. He stood, reaching into his pocket to extract a business card. It contained only a phone number, no name or address. If you need help, call this number. It's a secure line. I can't promise much, but I have some contacts still active in the intelligence community. People who respected Raymond, who know he got a raw deal. Jackson accepted the card, tucking it into his pocket. Why should I trust you? Frank smiled sadly. You shouldn't, not yet, but Raymond would want you to have someone watching your back. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Raymond used to talk about a sequence, numbers that meant something to him. Did you find anything like that? Jackson kept his expression neutral. No. Frank nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the lie. If you do, guard it carefully. It's the key to everything he was protecting. With that, he left, the door closing softly behind him. Jackson watched through the window as Frank returned to his vehicle and drove away, the SUV's tires crunching on the gravel. Dad? Sophia's voice broke the silence. Is he one of the good guys? Jackson considered. I don't know yet, but he knew things, details about Raymond that match what we've found. Should we look at the trunk again? Jackson shook his head. Not right now. First, we need to secure this place better. If Frank could find us, others can too. They spent the rest of the day reinforcing doors and windows, creating subtle alarm systems from found materials, tripwires of fishing line connected to cans of loose nails, boards strategically placed to creak when stepped on. Jackson applied skills honed in combat zones where perimeter security meant survival. While working on a broken shutter, Jackson noticed Sophia sitting cross-legged on the library floor, Raymond's journal open before her, transcribing passages into her own notebook. "What are you doing?" She didn't look up. "Making a code book. Uncle Raymond, or whoever he was, used patterns. See these numbers? They're not random. They repeat across different entries, always near certain words." Jackson knelt beside him, examining the pages. She was right. Sequences of numbers appeared throughout, often neighboring references to specific locations or events. "You have a good eye for patterns," she shrugged. "Mom's financial advisors used to leave reports around. I figured out they were using coded language to hide risky investments." She looked up, expression serious. "People think kids don't understand things. I don't make that mistake." Jackson smiled, ruffling her hair gently. "Keep working on this. It might be important." By evening, they had fortified the house as best they could with limited resources. Jackson's military instincts wouldn't allow him to relax completely, but he felt marginally better about their security. After dinner, a meager affair of canned beans heated on their portable stove, they returned to the library. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in a warm, dim glow. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did Mom really leave?" The question caught him off guard. He'd always been careful not to speak ill of Vanessa, regardless of his personal feelings. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "I'm not a baby. I understand complicated things." Jackson sighed, considering his words carefully. "Your mom and I, we wanted different lives. After my last deployment, I changed. Or maybe I just stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't." "Because of what happened in Afghanistan?" Jackson looked at her sharply. "Who told you about Afghanistan?" "I heard Mom talking on the phone once. She said you came back broken after what happened at some place called Khyber Pass." Jackson felt his chest tighten. The Khyber Pass operation had been classified, a mission that went catastrophically wrong due to intelligence failures. He'd lost 4 men, good men, friends, and sustained injuries that still plagued him on cold mornings. "That was a difficult time," he said carefully. "I made choices that saved lives, but not everyone agreed with those choices." "Did you do something wrong?" "No, I did what was right, but it wasn't what was expected." "Sometimes those are different things." Sophia seemed to consider this. "Is that why we're here? Because you do what's right instead of what's expected?" Jackson felt a surge of pride at her perception. "Partly, I couldn't be the person your mom wanted me to be, someone who cared about status and appearances more than truth and integrity." "Like Raymond?" "Maybe. I never met him, but from what we're learning, we might have understood each other." Sophia nodded, satisfied with this answer for now. She returned to her code-breaking efforts while Jackson stared into the dying fire, lost in memories of decisions made under fire, choices that had altered the course of his life. Later that night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Jackson returned to the hidden room alone. He carefully retrieved several folders from the trunk, bringing them into the library to examine by firelight. The documents painted a disturbing picture. According to Raymond's meticulously organized evidence, the Watergate break-in had been merely a cover for something more sinister, an attempt to retrieve documents that implicated high-ranking officials in selling classified information to foreign agents during the height of the Cold War. The scandal that brought down Nixon was just the visible symptom of a deeper disease in the American political system. Raymond had compiled names, dates, bank transfers, photographed meetings. His evidence was comprehensive, damning, and dangerous to people who had built powerful legacies on buried secrets. Most concerning were the names that appeared throughout: senators still serving, business leaders still controlling vast empires, and one name that made Jackson's blood run cold: Charles Harrington, Vanessa's father. The Harrington family's wealth and influence had never been fully explained to Jackson's satisfaction. Old money, Vanessa had always said. Family investments dating back generations. But according to Raymond's evidence, Charles Harrington had served as a financial conduit for funds paid by foreign interests for American military secrets in the early 1970s. If this was true, it explained the family's contempt for Raymond, their determination to paint him as delusional. It might even explain their opposition to Jackson's relationship with Vanessa once they learned his military background. Jackson carefully returned the documents to the trunk, his mind racing. The implications were staggering, not just for history, but for his personal situation. If the Harringtons knew what Raymond had left behind, they would stop at nothing to suppress it, including using Sophia as leverage. The next morning brought a break in the weather. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like miniature constellations. For the first time since their arrival, the house felt almost welcoming. Jackson made a simple breakfast of oatmeal cooked over their camp stove. Sophia ate quietly, her notebook open beside her, still working on deciphering Raymond's code. "I think I figured something out," she said suddenly. "These numbers, they're page references to books." "Books?" She nodded excitedly. "See this sequence? 147-23-9. I checked the copy of Treasure Island I found. Page 147, paragraph 23, word 9 is buried. In this one," she pointed to another sequence, 2-2-18-4 in Moby Dick is secret. Jackson examined her notes with growing appreciation for his daughter's intelligence. "You're building a translation key." Exactly. Raymond was using books as his cipher, books that were important to him, that he'd expect the right person to figure out. They spent the morning testing her theory, pulling volumes from the library shelves and checking against the number sequences in Raymond's journal. Not every book yielded results. Some were too damaged by water or time, but enough matched to confirm Sophia's hypothesis. Slowly, phrases emerged from the seemingly random numbers. Evidence in capital safe. 3 witnesses still living. Trust only the marked ones. "This is incredible work," Jackson told her, his pride evident. Raymond would be impressed. She beamed at the praise. "I like puzzles. Mom always said it was a waste of time." Jackson was about to respond when a sound from outside caught his attention, the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel. He moved swiftly to the window, keeping to the side to avoid being seen. A convoy of 3 vehicles was approaching, a black SUV similar to Frank's, a silver sedan, and a white van marked with a County Child Protective Services logo. Jackson felt his stomach drop. "Sophia, go to your room. Take your notebook and bear. Stay there until I come get you." She recognized the urgency in his voice and obeyed without question, gathering her things and disappearing upstairs. Jackson quickly secured the hidden room, then straightened his clothing and ran a hand through his hair, trying to look more presentable than he felt. The vehicles parked in a semicircle before the house. From the lead SUV emerged a woman in a crisp pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She surveyed the property with obvious distaste. From the CPS van came 2 people, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a younger man carrying a camera. The sedan revealed a familiar face, Vanessa's family lawyer, Theodore Whitaker. Jackson stepped onto the porch, positioning himself at the top of the stairs, establishing the psychological high ground as visitors approached. Military tactics applied everywhere, even here. "Mr. Hayes," the blonde woman began without introduction. "I'm Claire Davidson, representing Mrs. Hayes in matters concerning your daughter Sophia." "Ms. Davidson," Jackson acknowledged coolly. "This is private property." "We're here on official business," she replied, gesturing to the CPS workers. "These are Miss Porter and Mr. Keene from Child Protective Services. There have been concerns raised about the living conditions in which you are keeping a minor child." Jackson kept his expression neutral, though internally he cursed. He'd expected this move, using the system against him, but not so soon. "Do you have court orders authorizing this inspection?" Theodore Whitaker stepped forward, extending a document. "Everything is in order, Mr. Hayes. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can return with the sheriff. Your choice." Jackson accepted the paper, scanning it quickly. The language was legal and precise, a court-ordered welfare check based on allegations of unsafe living conditions. Vanessa had moved fast. "I have nothing to hide," Jackson said finally, stepping aside to allow them entry. But I'll remind you that my custody agreement is legally binding and was granted with full knowledge of our living situation. The CPS woman, Ms. Porter, offered a tight smile. We're just here to ensure the child's safety and welfare, Mr. Hayes. Standard procedure. They entered the house, and Jackson watched as their expressions registered the dilapidated conditions. The photographer immediately began taking pictures, focusing on the worst areas: collapsed ceilings, exposed wiring, mold-covered walls. "Where is Sophia?" Ms. Davidson demanded. "Upstairs, reading." "I'll get her." Jackson moved toward the stairs, tension coiling in his muscles. This was a tactical situation now, territory defense against hostile forces. He found Sophia sitting on her makeshift bed, clutching her bear. "There are people here from child services," he explained gently. "They want to check that you're okay, that this place is safe enough for you to live in." "It's Mom, isn't it? She sent them." "Probably, but don't worry. Just answer their questions honestly. We have nothing to hide." Sophia nodded, her young face showing remarkable composure. They descended the stairs together, Jackson's hand protectively on her shoulder. The inspection was thorough and pointed. They examined the kitchen facilities, the sleeping arrangements, the bathroom with its questionable plumbing. They asked about schooling plans, medical access, food supplies. Sophia answered questions directly, with a maturity beyond her years, explaining her makeshift study area in the library, the book she was reading, the history she was learning about the house. Ms. Porter's demeanor softened somewhat as she spoke with Sophia, but Mr. Keene continued documenting everything, his camera focusing on every deficiency. Theodore Whitaker observed silently, occasionally making notes, while Ms. Davidson conducted her own parallel investigation, opening cupboards and drawers without asking permission. "Is this really the best you can provide for your daughter, Mr. Hayes?" she asked pointedly, gesturing around the decrepit space. "A moldy, collapsing structure in the middle of nowhere?" "We've only been here a week," Jackson replied evenly. "Renovations are underway. This house has good bones and historical significance." "Historical significance doesn't keep a child warm or safe from structural collapse. We're comfortable enough for now. I have savings set aside for improvements once we're settled." Ms. Davidson's smile was cold. "Savings? According to our information, you surrendered all financial assets in the divorce settlement." "Not all," Jackson said. "I maintained separate accounts from my military service." This wasn't entirely true. His military pension was modest, and much of his combat pay had gone into the house he'd surrendered to Vanessa. But they didn't need to know that. The inspection continued for nearly 2 hours. By the end, Jackson could read the outcome in their body language. This wasn't going well. As they prepared to leave, Ms. Porter took him aside. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be direct with you. While I can see you're doing your best, this environment raises several red flags for child welfare. The structural issues, inadequate heating, potential mold exposure, these are serious concerns." "We're addressing them," Jackson insisted. "Rome wasn't built in a day." "Children don't have days to wait for safe housing," she replied firmly. "I'll be filing my report today. I strongly suggest you consider temporary alternative housing while you complete renovations. Otherwise, we may need to recommend a temporary custody adjustment." The words hit like physical blows. "You mean remove my daughter?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Temporarily until suitable accommodations can be arranged." Jackson fought to keep his voice level. "Miss Porter, my daughter has been through enough transitions. This house may not be perfect, but it's stable. She's safe, fed, loved. Removing her would cause far more harm than a few weeks in less than ideal conditions while we improve things. I understand your position, but my responsibility is to the child's physical safety first." They left shortly after, the convoy of vehicles disappearing down the driveway in a cloud of dust. Jackson stood on the porch long after they'd gone, the court order crumpled in his fist. Sophia appeared beside him, slipping her small hand into his. "Are they going to take me away?" Jackson knelt down to her level, looking her in the eyes. "No, I won't let that happen." "Promise, I promise, Bajo." But as the day wore on, the weight of that promise grew heavier. Jackson knew the system well enough to recognize the machinery being set in motion against him. Without resources, without influence, fighting Vanessa and the Harrington family would be nearly impossible. By evening, his fears were confirmed. A courier arrived with another court document, an emergency hearing scheduled for the following week to review the custody arrangement based on the CPS report. Jackson had expected this, but not the speed with which it was happening. Someone was pulling strings, accelerating the process. After Sophia went to bed, Jackson paced the library, his mind racing through options. He could run, take Sophia and disappear. His military training made him better equipped than most to go off-grid. But that would mean a life on the run, forever looking over their shoulder, Sophia cut off from any normal childhood. He could fight in court, but without resources for proper legal representation, against the Harrington fortune and influence, the outcome seemed predetermined. Or he could find leverage, something in Raymond's evidence that would force Vanessa and her family to back off. The thought made him uncomfortable. Using classified information for personal gain went against everything he believed in. But if it meant protecting Sophia, Jackson retrieved Frank Warren's card from his pocket, staring at the lone phone number. He needed advice, maybe even help. But could he trust Frank? The man knew Raymond, seemed genuinely concerned, but Jackson's years in special operations had taught him that appearances were often crafted to inspire precisely the trust he was feeling. He would need to make a supply run tomorrow. Food, building materials, and access to a secure phone. Decisions would have to be made, but not tonight. Tonight, he needed rest and clarity. Morning arrived with a heavy fog that clung to the trees like ghost ships anchored in a spectral harbor. Jackson woke before dawn, checked on Sophia, who was still sleeping soundly, then prepared for the day ahead. He made a list of supplies, counted his dwindling cash, and planned the most efficient route to town and back. Before leaving, he secured the house as best he could, instructing Sophia on emergency procedures. If anyone comes while I'm gone, don't answer the door. Use the hidden room. There's a panel at the back that leads to a crawl space under the east wing. You can hide there until I return. She nodded solemnly. At 10 years old, she was learning lessons in vigilance and security that no child should need. The drive to town took 40 minutes on winding country roads that cut through forests beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. Jackson kept checking his rear-view mirror, a habit from combat zones that had saved his life more than once. No tails, no suspicious vehicles. Small mercies. The town of Millfield was modest. A single main street lined with brick buildings dating back to the 19th century, a few side streets with newer construction, and the usual collection of franchise businesses at the outskirts. Jackson parked near the hardware store, his first stop for repair supplies. Inside, he methodically collected what he needed: lumber for structural reinforcement, roofing materials, insulation, basic plumbing fixtures. The cost added up quickly, eating into his limited funds, but these were necessities if he wanted any chance of satisfying CPS requirements. As he waited at the checkout, he became aware of eyes on him. The store had gone quieter, conversations pausing mid-sentence. The clerk, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a name tag reading Earl, regarded him with undisguised curiosity. "You're the fella who moved into the old Wells place," Earl said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. Heard you're fixing it up. Trying to?" Earl nodded, scanning items without further comment, but Jackson could feel the attention of other customers, sense their unspoken interest. The video had done its work. He was now a local curiosity, the disgraced veteran who'd walked away from wealth to live in a ruin. After loading his purchases into the truck, Jackson found a payphone outside the local diner, one of the few remaining in an age of cell phones. He dialed the number from Frank's card, feeding quarters into the slot. 3 rings, then a click. "Identify," a voice answered, crisp and professional. "Jackson Hayes, Frank Warren gave me this number." A pause. "Location?" "Millfield, Main Street payphone." "Hold." The line went silent for nearly a minute. Jackson waited, watching the street, noting every car that passed, every pedestrian who might show too much interest in his call. Finally, Frank's voice came on the line. "Jackson, I was hoping you'd call sooner. Things have been busy. CPS visited yesterday. Emergency custody hearing next week." A soft curse from Frank's end. "They're moving faster than I expected. They must be nervous about what you might have found." "I need advice. Maybe more." Not over the phone. There's a diner called Maze about 10 miles south of your property, just off Route 9. Can you be there at 1300 hours? Yes. Come alone. We'll talk then. The line went dead. Jackson replaced the receiver, considering the implications. Frank was operating with military precision, using secure communication protocols. Either he was genuinely concerned about surveillance, or he was creating an elaborate show to earn Jackson's trust. Either way, Jackson needed more information, and Frank seemed the only source available. After completing his errands, groceries, additional supplies, a stop at the bank to withdraw what remained of his accessible funds, Jackson headed to May's Diner, arriving 15 minutes early to scout the location. The establishment was typical small-town Americana: vinyl booths, chrome fixtures, a counter with swiveling stools, and the smell of coffee and grease permeating everything. Jackson chose a booth with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the kitchen exit, positioning himself with his back to the wall. Old habits. He ordered coffee and waited, watching the door. Frank arrived precisely at 1300, alone and seemingly unarmed, though Jackson knew better than to assume appearances matched reality. The older man slid into the booth without greeting, signaling the waitress for coffee. "You're in trouble," Frank said once she'd left. "The Harringtons are pulling every string they have, which is considerable." "Tell me something I don't, Frank leaned forward. "How about this? Charles Harrington made 3 calls to Washington yesterday. One to a sitting senator on the Intelligence Committee, one to the deputy director of the FBI, and one to a man who officially doesn't exist but operates as a cleanup specialist for certain government agencies. They're not just trying to take your daughter, Jackson. They're trying to bury whatever you might have found." Jackson kept his expression neutral, but internally alarm bells were ringing. "How do you know about those calls?" "I still have friends in signal intelligence. Not everything goes through official channels." "And why would these friends risk their careers to monitor a private citizen's calls?" Frank smiled slightly. "Because Raymond Wells wasn't just any intelligence officer. He was a legend, one of the few who put truth above politics, country above career. There are people who remember that, who know he was silenced unfairly. People who'd like to see his work finally recognized." The waitress returned with Frank's coffee and took their lunch orders. Once she'd gone, Frank continued, his voice lower. "What exactly have you found, Jackson? And don't bother denying you found something. I can see it in your eyes." Jackson considered his options. Full disclosure seemed risky, but he needed help, and Frank remained his only potential ally. Documents, photographs, recordings, evidence that Watergate was a cover for something bigger, selling military secrets during Vietnam and the Cold War. Names of people involved, including Charles Harrington. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Raymond suspected a network reaching into the highest levels of government and industry. Contractors selling weapons specs, politicians selling policy decisions, intelligence officers selling agent identities. A marketplace of betrayal. And no one believed him. Oh, people believed him. That was the problem. The evidence was too credible to dismiss, so they had to discredit the messenger instead. Mental instability, paranoid delusions, PTSD, before we had a name for it. They took everything: his career, his reputation, nearly his freedom. And now they're coming after me. They're coming after what they think you might have found. You're just an obstacle. Jackson processed this, the implications aligning with what he'd pieced together from Raymond's documents. "What's your stake in this, Frank? Why help me?" Frank's weathered face showed a flicker of emotion. Regret, perhaps, or old anger. "I was Raymond's handler for the Nightshade operation, the intelligence gathering that led him to these discoveries. When things went south, when they turned on him, I didn't stand up. I chose career over conscience. It's a debt I never repaid." He sipped his coffee, grimacing at either the taste or the memory. Raymond understood. He never blamed me. That made it worse somehow. Their food arrived. A burger for Jackson, pot roast for Frank. They ate in silence for a few minutes, each man weighing the conversation against personal calculations of risk and trust. "The custody hearing," Jackson said finally. "Can you help with that?" "Not directly. The Harringtons have too much local influence. But I might be able to buy you time." Frank dabbed his mouth with the napkin. There's someone you should meet, a journalist named Diana Mitchell. She covered Watergate, knew Raymond briefly during that period. She's retired now, but still has connections in media and politics. A journalist is the last thing I need. This needs to stay quiet. Diana isn't looking for headlines. She's looking for justice, for the story that got buried with Raymond's reputation. She might be able to create enough public interest that the Harringtons would think twice about moving against you too openly. Jackson considered this. And I'm supposed to just trust her with classified information? The statute of limitations on most of these secrets expired decades ago. What remains classified is only secret to protect reputations, not national security. Frank pushed his plate aside. But that's your call. I'm just offering options. They finished the meal discussing practical matters, security improvements for the house, legal strategies for the custody hearing, financial considerations. Frank offered to connect Jackson with a lawyer who had experience fighting against wealthy interests, someone who might work on contingency given the high-profile nature of the case. As they prepared to leave, Frank handed Jackson a burner phone. Secure, untraceable. My number is programmed in. Call if you need anything, or if anything changes. He hesitated, then added, and Jackson, be careful with Sophia. Children in these situations sometimes become leverage. The warning sent ice through Jackson's veins. No one touches my daughter. Frank's expression was grave. I believe you. Make sure they believe it too. The drive back to the house was tense, Jackson's mind churning with new information and escalating concerns. The stakes had risen considerably. Not just custody of Sophia, but potentially his freedom, maybe even his life if the Harringtons were truly desperate to bury Raymond's evidence. As he turned onto the long driveway leading to the house, Jackson immediately sensed something wrong. The air felt disturbed, the silence too complete. He slowed the truck, scanning the property with trained eyes. The front door stood slightly ajar. He was certain he had locked it. Jackson killed the engine 100 yards from the house, retrieving the hunting knife he kept under the seat, the closest thing to a weapon he had. Moving silently through the overgrown yard, using trees and brush for cover, he approached the house from an angle, keeping the porch in view. No vehicles visible, but that meant nothing. Professionals would park out of sight. He circled to the back, noting a window forced open, clean work, minimal damage, the mark of someone with training. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his mind remained cold, tactical. Find Sophia first. Assess threats second. Neutralize if necessary. Jackson entered through the kitchen, moving in a combat crouch, knife ready. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and settling noises. No footsteps, no voices, no signs of current occupation. But someone had definitely been here. Drawers left open, papers disturbed, furniture shifted slightly from its previous positions. He moved room by room, clearing each space with methodical precision. The library showed the most disturbance, books pulled from shelves, Raymond's desk drawers emptied onto the floor. The hearthstones probed and loosened. They had been looking for the hidden room, but apparently hadn't found it. Small mercies. Sophia, he called softly, mounting the stairs. Sophia, it's Dad. Are you here? No answer. He checked her room. Empty, the sleeping bag unrolled but vacant. Fear clutched at his throat, but he forced it down. Panic wouldn't help. Think. Where would she go? The hidden room, the crawl space he'd shown her. Jackson returned to the library, carefully activating the mechanism that opened the concealed door. It slid aside smoothly, revealing darkness beyond. Sophia, it's safe now. It's just me. A small sound from the back of the hidden room, movement in the shadows. Then, incredibly, a tiny light flared, the LED keychain he'd given her for emergencies. Dad? Her voice was small, frightened. It's me, sweetheart. You can come out. She emerged from behind a filing cabinet, crawling from a space barely large enough for her small frame. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, but she was unharmed. She flew into his arms, trembling. There were men, she whispered against his shoulder. 2 of them. They had guns. Jackson held her tightly, relief and rage warring within him. Did they see you? She shook her head. I was reading in the library when I heard a car. I remembered what you said and hid in the secret room. They searched everywhere, but they didn't find the panel. Good girl, he murmured, stroking her hair. You did exactly right. They took things, Dad. Papers from your room, and they were talking about a trunk. Jackson's blood ran cold. They knew about the trunk. Somehow they knew what Raymond had left behind. We need to move it, he said, more to himself than to Sophia. It's not safe here anymore. With Sophia's help, Jackson transferred the contents of the trunk to several duffel bags. The most critical documents, the recordings, the photographs. The trunk itself was too heavy to transport easily, so he left it, replacing the floorboards and concealing the hidden room once more. Where are we going? Sophia asked as he instructed her to pack essentials into her backpack. Somewhere safe, just for a little while. Are we running away? Jackson knelt before her, meeting her eyes. No, we're regrouping. There's a difference. Soldiers don't run from battles they can win. They just choose the right ground to fight on. She nodded, accepting this explanation with the same quiet resilience she'd shown throughout their ordeal. Jackson marveled at her strength, even as he cursed the circumstances forcing her to develop it so young. They loaded the truck quickly, taking only what was necessary: clothing, food, the documents, Sophia's bear. Jackson performed a final sweep of the house, ensuring they'd left nothing critical behind, then secured it as best he could. Whoever had broken in might return, but they wouldn't find what they were looking for. As dusk settled over the Vermont landscape, painting the trees in deepening shades of gold and crimson, Jackson pointed the truck away from the main road, taking a logging track that wound deeper into the forest before eventually connecting with a different highway. Another tactic from his military days: never take the obvious route when evasion is the goal. Where are we really going, Dad? Sophia asked as they bounced along the rough track. Jackson checked the rearview mirror again, confirming they weren't followed. To meet someone who might be able to help us. A friend of Raymond's. Frank? No, someone else, a journalist named Diana Mitchell. Sophia considered this. Is she one of the good guys? I don't know yet, but we're running out of options, and sometimes you have to take calculated risks. The burner phone Frank had given him contained only one other number besides Frank's own: Diana Mitchell's. Jackson had called her from a rest stop an hour earlier, arranging to meet at a motel outside Burlington. She had sounded cautious but intrigued, especially when he mentioned Raymond Wells. The motel was typical roadside accommodation, single story, doors opening directly to the parking lot, neon sign buzzing with a few letters burnt out. Jackson chose a room at the far end, backing the truck up to the door for quick access if needed. Old habits again. Diana Mitchell arrived 30 minutes later, parking a modest sedan 3 spaces away, close enough for convenience, far enough for security. Smart. She was older than Jackson had expected, 70s at least, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen history unfold firsthand and helped write the first draft of it. In the motel room, with curtains drawn and the television turned on to mass conversation from potential listening devices, Diana examined the documents Jackson had brought with the methodical attention of a seasoned investigator. My God, she murmured, studying a particularly damning photograph showing Charles Harrington meeting with a known Soviet operative in 1972. Raymond actually had proof all along. You believe it's authentic? Jackson asked. I knew many of these people, covered their careers, their scandals, their triumphs. She tapped a wrinkled finger on another document, a financial ledger showing payments through Swiss accounts. This matches rumors that circulated for years but could never be substantiated. Raymond had the missing pieces. Sophia sat cross-legged on one of the beds, quietly observing the adults with keen interest. Diana smiled at her. You must be Sophia. Your father says you've been quite the detective yourself. Sophia nodded shyly. I like solving puzzles. The best journalists do too. Diana returned her attention to Jackson. These documents represent an explosive revelation about American political history. The question is, what do you intend to do with them? Right now, my only concern is protecting my daughter. The Harringtons are using their influence to challenge my custody, and I believe it's connected to what Raymond left behind. Diana nodded thoughtfully. Charles Harrington has carefully constructed his legacy as a financial genius and philanthropist. Evidence of treason would destroy not just him, but the entire family's standing. She adjusted her glasses. Have you considered using this as leverage? Blackmail isn't my style. No, I don't imagine it is. She sounded approving. But perhaps a different kind of leverage. Information like this has power beyond the personal. It has historical significance, political implications. The right allies could help ensure your daughter's safety while also serving the cause of truth. What allies? The government? The same institutions that silenced Raymond? Institutions change, people retire or die. New generations take their places. Diana tapped the documents. Many of the people implicated here are still alive, still influential, but they're also old, vulnerable to exposure in ways they weren't 40 years ago. She leaned back in her chair, considering. There's a congressman, Thomas Wheeler. He's chairman of the House Intelligence Oversight Committee. His father was one of the few who supported Raymond back then, tried to prevent his discrediting. Wheeler has spent his career trying to increase transparency in intelligence operations. He might be someone who could help navigate this politically. Jackson absorbed this, weighing options, risks, potential outcomes. And in the meantime, the custody hearing is in 5 days. In the meantime, you need legal representation. I have contacts, good lawyers who take on causes rather than just clients. She paused, then added carefully, and you might consider allowing me to prepare a story, not for immediate publication, but as insurance. If anything happens to you or Sophia, the whole truth goes public. Mutually assured destruction, Jackson murmured. A deterrent, Diana corrected. Sometimes the most effective weapon is one you never have to use. Their discussion continued late into the night, strategizing, planning, considering contingencies. Diana proved to be not just knowledgeable but shrewd, with a veteran journalist's understanding of how power and information intersected. She agreed to make calls in the morning, reaching out to both legal contacts and Congressman Wheeler. After she left, Jackson secured the room as best he could, checking windows, placing improvised alarms at the door. Sophia had fallen asleep hours earlier, curled around her bear, exhaustion finally overwhelming her remarkable resilience. Jackson sat in the chair by the window, maintaining watch, his mind cycling through the day's revelations. The pieces were falling into place. Raymond's disgrace, the Harrington family's hostility, the desperate efforts to recover the trunk's contents. It painted a picture of corruption reaching back decades, secrets preserved through power and influence. But something still didn't feel right. Some element remained unexplained, some connection unestablished. Jackson returned to the documents, reviewing them with fresh eyes, looking for what he might have missed. In a folder containing Raymond's personal papers rather than his evidence, Jackson found something odd, a birth certificate for a child named Jackson Wells, born in 1978 to Margaret Wells, Raymond's sister, Jackson's mother. Nothing unusual there. But paperclipped to it was a medical record, a blood type analysis for Raymond Wells and the infant Jackson. The relationship indicated wasn't uncle and nephew. It was father and son. Jackson stared at the document, the implications thundering through him like artillery fire. Raymond Wells wasn't his uncle. Raymond was his father, which meant the inheritance wasn't random. The house, the documents, the secrets, they had been left specifically to Raymond's son. And suddenly, the Harringtons' particular animosity toward him made perfect sense. It wasn't just about the evidence. It was about who he was, the son of the man who had uncovered their patriarch's treason. As dawn broke over the Vermont mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jackson Hayes sat motionless by the motel window, the truth of his identity settling over him like newly fallen snow, cold, transformative, and impossible to ignore. The man he had been told was his uncle, a distant relative, a family embarrassment, was actually his father. The man whose intelligence and integrity had threatened powerful interests. The man who had been systematically destroyed by those same interests. The man who had left behind not just evidence of corruption, but a legacy to his son. Jackson glanced at Sophia, still sleeping peacefully, her small form rising and falling with each breath. His daughter, Raymond's granddaughter. The continuation of a bloodline that had nearly been erased from history. And with that realization came another, more chilling thought. If the Harringtons knew this connection, and given their resources, they likely did, Then the custody battle wasn't just about silencing potential revelations. It was about removing the last living heir of Raymond Wells from the equation entirely. The stakes had just risen exponentially. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about legacy, identity, and the lengths to which powerful people would go to protect themselves from the truth. Jackson reached for the burner phone, dialing Frank's number. The older man answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the early hour. "We need to talk," Jackson said without preamble. "Raymond Wells was my father, wasn't he?" A long pause from Frank's end, then a heavy sigh. "I wondered when you'd figure that out. Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't my place. Raymond wanted you to discover it yourself, to make your own choices about what that meant, just as he made his choice to keep his distance to protect you and your mother." Jackson processed this, emotions warring within him, anger at the deception, grief for the relationship he never had, determination that had suddenly found deeper roots. "The Harringtons know, don't they? That's why they've always been so against me." "Yes." Charles Harrington and Raymond were once colleagues before they became enemies. Harrington recognized you the moment Vanessa brought you home. You have Raymond's eyes. His jawline must have been like seeing a ghost. Jackson's mind raced, recalibrating everything in light of this revelation. "We need to move faster. They're not just coming after evidence now. They're coming after Raymond's son and granddaughter." "I agree. Where are you now?" "Secure location with Diana Mitchell." "Good. She's trustworthy. One of the few who stood by Raymond publicly." Frank's voice dropped lower. "Jackson, there's something else you should know. The operation Raymond was investigating, Nightshade, it wasn't just about selling secrets. It was about a contingency plan some hardliners created during the height of the Cold War. A network of sleeper agents and resources outside official channels prepared to continue the fight if the government fell or surrendered. A shadow government? More like a shadow army. And the funds to maintain it came from selling military secrets to the very enemies they were preparing to fight. The ultimate irony, betraying the country to save it, in their minds. Jackson felt the pieces clicking into place, and the Harringtons were the bankers. Charles Harrington managed the money, laundered it, invested it, built his family fortune on treason disguised as patriotism. Frank paused. Raymond discovered it all, had evidence that would have sent dozens of powerful men to prison, but they got to him first, discredited him, isolated him, buried his findings. Until now. Until now, Frank agreed. But be careful, Jackson. These men may be older, but their influence remains considerable, and they've had decades to prepare contingencies if Raymond's evidence ever surfaced. The call ended with arrangements to meet again that afternoon. Jackson sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing the weight of what he'd learned. He was Raymond Wells's son. The house wasn't just an inheritance, it was a birthright. And the evidence wasn't just historical documents. It was his father's legacy, entrusted to him. Sophia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She saw him by the window and smiled sleepily. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep?" "Not much. Too much thinking to do." She sat up hugging her bear. "About the hearing?" "That and other things." Jackson hesitated, then made a decision. She deserved to know. "Sophia, I learned something important last night. About Raymond, about who he really was to me." She watched him with those perceptive eyes, waiting. "He wasn't my uncle, he was my father." Sophia absorbed this without visible surprise. "I thought it might be something like that. In his journal, he kept writing about my son, but never used your name. And there were the pictures where you looked just like him." Jackson shook his head, smiling despite everything. "Not much gets past you, does it? Mom always said, I noticed too much." She hugged her bear tighter. "So that means he was my grandfather?" "Yes." "And the house is really ours? Really, really ours?" "Yes, it's our family home." She nodded, satisfied with this confirmation. "Then we have to go back. We can't let them take it away." "It's not safe right now." "But it's ours," she insisted with the simple, powerful logic of childhood. "And Raymond, Grandpa, left us those papers for a reason. We have to use them. We have to make people know the truth." Jackson studied his daughter, seeing Raymond's determination in her small face. She was right, of course. Running, hiding, these were temporary measures. Eventually, they would need to stand their ground, to fight for what was rightfully theirs, to fulfill the trust Raymond had placed in them. But first, they needed allies, resources, and a plan. Diana returned mid-morning with coffee, breakfast, and news. She had contacted Congressman Wheeler, who expressed immediate interest in meeting. She had also reached out to a lawyer named Michael Chen, who specialized in custody cases involving powerful opponents. He's agreed to take your case pro bono, Diana explained. His father was a Vietnamese refugee who worked with American intelligence during the war. Some of the information Raymond gathered helped protect Vietnamese assets who were being compromised by the leaks. Chen sees this as repaying a debt. This was the first piece of genuinely good news in days. Jackson felt a small knot of tension release in his chest. When can we meet him? This afternoon, he's driving up from Boston. Diana sipped her coffee, studying Jackson over the rim of her cup. You look like you've had a revelation. Briefly, Jackson explained what he'd discovered about his true relationship to Raymond. Diana nodded slowly, unsurprised. I suspected as much. Raymond never spoke of family except once, when he mentioned a son he'd had to give up to protect him. The timing would have matched your birth. Did you know my mother? No, Raymond was extraordinarily careful about keeping that part of his life separate from his work. For her protection and yours. She set down her cup. This changes the dynamics considerably. You're not just the inheritor of Raymond's evidence. You're the inheritor of his legacy, his blood, and his enemies, Jackson added grimly. Yes, which makes it all the more important that we move strategically. Diana spread several newspapers on the motel room table. I've been monitoring the coverage of your situation. The viral video has spawned dozens of articles, most painting you as either a victim or villain, depending on the publication's political leanings. She pointed to one headline, Delta Force vet loses everything for daughter. Another read, Unstable ex-soldier kidnaps child to decrepit mansion. Public opinion is divided, which works in our favor. It creates space for us to shape the narrative before it solidifies. She looked at Jackson intently. But we need to decide what that narrative should be. How much of the truth are you prepared to make public? It was the question Jackson had been wrestling with since discovering the trunk. The evidence Raymond had gathered implicated not just Charles Harrington, but dozens of other influential figures, some still active in government or business. Full disclosure could create political earthquakes, possibly even threaten national security, depending on how deep the corruption went. But partial disclosure might not provide enough leverage to protect Sophia or secure their future. I need to consult with Wheeler first, Jackson decided. Understand the potential ramifications beyond my personal situation. Diana nodded approvingly. Wise. Wheeler has the clearance and context to help navigate those waters. They spent the next hours planning the meeting with Chen and preparing for the custody hearing. Diana's journalistic experience proved invaluable. She knew how to organize evidence, create compelling narratives, anticipate counter-arguments. By noon, they had assembled a strong case documenting Vanessa's history of parental neglect, contrasted with Jackson's consistent involvement in Sophia's life. The meeting with Michael Chen was scheduled for 3 p.m. at a small law office in Burlington. Jackson insisted on security precautions, separate vehicles, different routes, constant awareness of surroundings. Diana and Sophia would travel together, with Jackson following at a distance to watch for tails or ambushes. The protocol proved prescient. Halfway to Burlington, Jackson spotted a black SUV that appeared on the road behind Diana's car, maintaining a consistent distance. Too consistent for random traffic. The vehicle matched the description of the one used by the men who had searched the house. Jackson called Diana on the burner phone. Possible tail on your 6, black Suburban, tinted windows. Noticed it, she replied calmly, hanging back too precisely. Professional job. Take the next exit. I'll stay with the Suburban. Diana acknowledged and smoothly diverted off the highway at the approaching exit. The Suburban immediately accelerated, clearly intending to follow. Jackson gunned his engine, pulling alongside the larger vehicle, forcing it to either acknowledge his presence or risk a collision. The Suburban's windows were too darkly tinted to see the occupants, but their reaction was immediate. The vehicle swerved, then accelerated rapidly, attempting to leave Jackson behind. A professional evasion maneuver. Jackson kept pace, his combat driving training activating automatically. The Suburban's driver was good, maintaining control at high speed, using other traffic as obstacles. But Jackson had learned these skills in environments where failure meant death. After several miles of cat and mouse along rural Vermont roads, the Suburban's driver apparently decided the pursuit wasn't worth the exposure. The vehicle suddenly veered onto a side road and disappeared into the countryside. Jackson didn't follow. The goal had been to distract them from Diana and Sophia, not to engage directly. He circled back, taking a roundabout route to the law office in Burlington, constantly checking for additional surveillance. Diana and Sophia had arrived safely, waiting inside with Michael Chen, a sharp-featured man in his 40s with an intense focus and the precise diction of someone who chose his words carefully. He shook Jackson's hand firmly. "Mr. Hayes, Diana has briefed me on the broad strokes of your situation. Quite extraordinary. Thank you for taking the case on such short notice. As Diana may have mentioned, I have personal reasons for involvement." Chen gestured to the conference room where documents were already spread across the table. But personal motivations aside, this is a fascinating legal challenge. The Harringtons' wealth creates certain advantages in court, but their very efforts to expedite proceedings may provide us with counter-leverage. How so? Emergency custody modifications require extraordinary circumstances. The standards are high specifically to prevent wealthy parties from abusing the system. Chen indicated a stack of legal texts he had open on the table. Their rushed timeline suggests desperation, which raises questions a good judge will notice. And for the next 2 hours, they strategized legal approaches, prepared responses to likely arguments, and reviewed the evidence of Jackson's fitness as a parent contrasted with Vanessa's history of delegation and distance. Chen was thorough, incisive, and surprisingly optimistic. "Based on what I've seen, Mr. Hayes, you have a stronger case than you realize. The judge assigned to your hearing, Eleanor Marks, has a reputation for favoring substance over appearance. She's ruled against wealthy parties numerous times when the facts warranted it. The Harringtons will bring everything they have," Jackson warned. "Influence, resources, possibly even manufactured evidence." "I'm counting on it," Chen replied with a tight smile. Overreach often creates opportunity. As they concluded the meeting, Chen pulled Jackson aside while Diana helped Sophia organize her notebook of observations about the house. Diana mentioned certain historical documents that might be relevant to understanding the Harringtons' motivations. "I don't need to see them yet, but their existence should be documented securely in case anything happens before the hearing." Jackson understood the implication. Insurance. Precisely. Something safely escrowed with multiple trusted parties, accessible only under specific circumstances. It was sound advice. Jackson had been thinking along similar lines since discovering his true relationship to Raymond. The documents weren't just leverage, they were potentially his and Sophia's life insurance if the Harringtons grew truly desperate. They left the law office separately, using the same security protocols as before. No tails appeared this time, but Jackson remained vigilant. The encounter with the Suburban had confirmed his worst fears. They were being actively hunted, not just legally challenged. The meeting with Congressman Wheeler was scheduled for the following morning in Montpelier. They would need a secure location for the night. Frank had suggested a small hunting cabin owned by a former intelligence colleague, off-grid, isolated, defensible, perfect for their needs. The cabin was located deep in the Green Mountains, accessible only by a rugged dirt track that would challenge anything less capable than Jackson's truck. Diana opted to return to Burlington, where she would begin preparing potential media strategies while remaining available for consultation by phone. As Jackson and Sophia settled into the rustic cabin for the night, the weight of their situation pressed heavily on him. They were caught in a conflict spanning decades, involving forces and interests far beyond their personal concerns. Raymond's legacy had become their burden, his enemies, their adversaries. Yet alongside this weight came clarity. For the first time since leaving the military, Jackson felt a sense of purpose that transcended mere survival. This wasn't just about custody or even justice for Raymond. It was about truth, about standing against corruption, about preserving a legacy that powerful interests had tried to erase. As Sophia slept on the cabin's narrow cot, Jackson stood watch by the window, the partial moon casting silver light across the forested landscape. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the meeting with Wheeler, preparations for the custody hearing, decisions about how much of Raymond's evidence to reveal and to whom. But tonight, in this moment of relative peace, Jackson allowed himself to consider who Raymond Wells had truly been. Not the disgraced recluse of family legend, but a man of principle who had sacrificed everything, including a relationship with his own son, to protect both his family and his country. And in that contemplation, Jackson Hayes, son of Raymond Wells, felt something stir within him, a connection to a father he had never known, but whose blood and courage ran through his veins. A legacy not of shame but of honor, not of madness but of unyielding integrity. Whatever came next, he would face it as Raymond's son, as Sophia's father, as the inheritor of a truth too important to remain buried. The house on the hill wasn't just property, it was the physical embodiment of that legacy. And Jackson swore silently to the night that they would return to it, would reclaim it, would restore it to what Raymond had intended it to be, not just a home, but a monument to the power of truth against the corrupting influence of power. The woods whispered around the cabin, a sound like secrets long kept finally finding voice. And Jackson Hayes listened, as his father had listened before him, for the quiet but insistent call of truth amidst the cacophony of convenient lies. Dawn broke over the green mountains, painting the forest in hues of amber and gold. Jackson stood on the cabin's small porch, steam rising from his coffee mug, watching as the world emerged from shadow. He had slept little, his mind churning with revelations, strategies, contingencies. Inside, Sophia still slept, curled around her bear, her face peaceful in a way it rarely was during waking hours. These days demanded too much vigilance from a 10-year-old. Jackson allowed her these moments of respite, knowing the day ahead would bring new challenges. The burner phone vibrated in his pocket. Frank's number. "Change of plans," Frank said without preamble. "Wheeler can't make Montpelier. Security concerns. He's arranging a more secure location, a former FEMA bunker near Killington. I'll text coordinates." "What security concerns?" "Surveillance on his regular venues. He thinks he's being watched." "By whom?" "That's the question, isn't it? After you contacted Diana, certain surveillance algorithms flagged the activity. Names from Raymond's files started circulating in secure channels. People are nervous, Jackson. Old men who thought their secrets were safe. How did they know we contacted Diana?" A pause from Frank's end. "That's what concerns me. Either Diana's communications are compromised or someone's feeding them information directly. Trust cautiously, Jackson. Not everyone in this story is who they appear to be." The call ended with arrangements to meet at the bunker at noon. Jackson roused Sophia gently, helping her pack their meager belongings. She moved with the quiet efficiency that still surprised him. A child who had adapted to crisis with remarkable resilience. "Who was on the phone?" she asked, rolling her sleeping bag with practiced motions. "Frank. Meeting location has changed." She nodded, accepting this without question. "Is it because of the men in the black car?" "Partly. People are getting nervous about what we found." "Good," she said with unexpected vehemence. "They should be nervous." Jackson studied his daughter, seeing something of Raymond in her determined expression. "You understand what is happening, don't you? What these documents mean? They're proof that important people did bad things and got away with it. And they hurt Grandpa Raymond because he tried to tell the truth." The simplicity of her assessment cut through the complexities that adults often use to obscure moral clarity. "That's exactly right. So we have to make it right, for him." Jackson nodded, touched by her sense of justice. "For him, for us, for the truth." They left the cabin as they'd found it, erasing traces of their presence, another habit from Jackson's military days. The truck moved carefully down the rugged mountain track, headlights cutting through lingering mists that clung to the trees like spectral sentinels. The FEMA bunker was located in a nondescript hillside, its entrance concealed by strategic landscaping and warning signs declaring, "Government property, no trespassing." Frank waited at a service road half a mile away, transferring them to his own vehicle for the final approach. Wheeler's already inside, Frank explained as they drove. Along with Diana and Chen, Wheeler brought his chief of staff, Sarah Lowell. She's cleared for classified material, completely trustworthy. Anyone else? No, Wheeler insisted on minimal attendance. Too many people increases risk. The bunker entrance was secured by both electronic systems and human guards, two men with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. They verified identities, performed discreet weapons checks, then escorted the group through steel doors into the facility. Inside, the bunker was surprisingly modern. LED lighting, climate control, communication arrays, built during the Cold War, upgraded for the War on Terror, now serving as a secure meeting place for discussions about decades-old secrets. History folding back on itself. Congressman Thomas Wheeler waited in the main conference room, a tall, lean man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes and the focused attention of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating complex situations. He rose as they entered, extending his hand to Jackson. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. Your father was a man of extraordinary integrity. The simple acknowledgement of Raymond as his father, stated without qualification or doubt, struck Jackson deeply. Wheeler knew, had probably been always known. You knew him well? My father did. They served together in Vietnam, intelligence operations. When Raymond was being systematically discredited, my father was one of the few who stood by him. Wheeler's expression darkened. It cost him his career advancement, but he never regretted it. Diana and Chen were already seated at the conference table, along with a woman in her 30s, Sarah Lowell, presumably, who observed everything with analytical precision. Sophia stayed close to Jackson, taking in the bunker's features with wide-eyed curiosity. Once seated, Wheeler went straight to the point. I understand you've discovered Raymond's documentation regarding Operation Nightshade and its aftermath. I need to know exactly what you have before we proceed further. Jackson studied Wheeler, measuring the man's trustworthiness. Frank had vouched for him, but Frank's earlier warning about trusting cautiously echoed in his mind. First, I need to understand your position on these matters, Congressman. Raymond's evidence implicates powerful people, some still active in government. Wheeler nodded, respecting the caution. My position is simple. The truth matters. Accountability matters. No one should be above the law, regardless of position or time past. He leaned forward. My father lost everything defending Raymond. I've spent my career in intelligence oversight trying to prevent similar abuses of power. I'm not interested in political points or partisan advantage. I'm interested in justice for a man who deserved better from his country. It was a good answer, perhaps too good, too neat. Jackson glanced at Sophia, who sat watching Wheeler with that unnervingly perceptive gaze. She gave a small nod. Trust, but verify. We have comprehensive documentation of Operation Nightshade, the sale of military intelligence to foreign powers during Vietnam and the Cold War. Financial records tracking payments through shell companies ultimately controlled by Charles Harrington. Communications between conspirators. Surveillance photographs. Audio recordings. Jackson paused. And personal journals connecting these activities to a contingency network established outside official channels. Wheeler exchanged glances with his chief of staff, who appeared unsurprised but concerned. The shadow protocols, she said quietly. Wheeler nodded. We've heard rumors for decades. A network of resources, operators, and assets established by hardliners who feared government capitulation during the Cold War. Officially, no such program existed. Unofficially? Unofficially, certain budget discrepancies and operational anomalies suggested something was happening outside authorized channels. But without proof. We have proof, Jackson said simply. Names, dates, locations, accounts. Wheeler absorbed this, his expression grave. You understand what this means? These revelations could implicate former cabinet secretaries, military leaders, intelligence directors, people whose legacies are enshrined in buildings and monuments. I understand exactly what it means. That's why I needed to meet with you before deciding how to proceed. Diana spoke up from her position at the table. The immediate concern is the custody hearing. The Harringtons are using their influence to remove Sophia from Jackson's care, almost certainly to gain leverage over the evidence. Chen nodded agreement. The legal maneuvers are sophisticated. They're attacking on multiple fronts: child welfare concerns, financial stability questions, even attempting to revive questions about Mr. Hayes's psychological fitness after his military service. Classic intelligence operation, Frank muttered. Discredit the messenger when you can't suppress the message. Same playbook they used against Raymond. Wheeler considered this. The custody hearing is scheduled for when? 3 days from now, Chen replied. Not much time. Wheeler turned to his chief of staff. Sarah, what's our assessment of Judge Marks? Would she be susceptible to influence? Unlikely. She has a reputation for independence and integrity. No financial vulnerabilities, no scandals, no political ambitions beyond her current position. She's near retirement and has nothing to gain from favoring wealth over justice. That's something, at least. Wheeler returned his attention to Jackson. Here's what I can offer. First, my personal testimony regarding Raymond's character and the circumstances of his disgrace. Second, classified security clearance for Judge Marks to review certain historical documents that would contextualize the Harringtons' motivations without necessarily revealing all of Raymond's evidence. Third, discrete inquiries into who exactly is monitoring your activities and through what channels. It was more than Jackson had expected. Substantial support from a position of legitimate power. Yet something still troubled him. And what do you want in return, Congressman? Wheeler smiled slightly, appreciating the directness. Eventually, access to Raymond's complete files. Not for publication or prosecution. The statute of limitations has expired on most of these crimes, but for historical accuracy. The intelligence community needs to acknowledge its failures as well as its successes. Raymond deserves vindication, even if posthumously. Before Jackson could respond, the bunker's communication system chimed. One of the security agents entered, his expression tense. Sir, we've detected unusual traffic on the access road. 2 vehicles approaching from the north, 1 from the south. Wheeler and Frank exchanged alarmed glances. We weren't followed, Frank insisted. Then someone knew we would be here, Wheeler said grimly. He turned to the agent. Security Protocol Alpha. No one enters without Level 5 clearance. The agent nodded and withdrew. Wheeler addressed the group. This facility has multiple exits and is hardened against most threats. But the fact that someone tracked us here is deeply concerning. Jackson was already moving, gathering Sophia's belongings, mind shifting to tactical assessment. How did they find us? This location isn't on any public registry. It isn't, Wheeler confirmed, which means the information came from someone with high-level access. His gaze swept the room, lingering momentarily on each face. Someone in this chain of communication. The implication hung in the air. A traitor in their midst, or at minimum, a security breach at the highest levels. Diana broke the tense silence. What matters now is protecting Sophia and the evidence. Arguments about who betrayed whom can wait. She was right. Jackson knelt beside Sophia, who watched the adults with solemn understanding beyond her years. Remember what we practiced? If we get separated? She nodded. Find high ground. Stay hidden. Use the emergency phone only if absolutely necessary. Good girl. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Stay close to me. Wheeler led them deeper into the bunker, past communications centers and storage rooms, to a service corridor connecting to an emergency exit. This leads to a maintenance road on the eastern slope, less visible from the main approach. As they moved, Frank fell into step beside Jackson. This isn't right, he muttered. This facility is classified. You need specialized access to even know it exists. Someone has that access, Jackson replied grimly. Question is, what are they after? Us or the evidence? At this point, probably both. They reached the emergency exit, a reinforced door with both electronic and mechanical locks. Wheeler entered a code, then used a physical key. The door opened to reveal a narrow tunnel sloping upward. This emerges in a maintenance shed about a quarter-mile east, Wheeler explained. There's a vehicle there, standard government SUV, nothing conspicuous. Keys are in the emergency lockbox, code 479631. You're not coming? Jackson asked. Wheeler shook his head. I'll handle whoever's approaching. My presence here has legitimate explanation. Oversight committee inspection. You don't have that luxury. It made sense, but Jackson hesitated. If they're after the evidence, they won't find it here, Wheeler assured him. Nothing was transferred to our systems. Decision time. Jackson looked to Frank, to Diana, to Chen, each representing different aspects of the complex situation they were navigating. Trust remained in short supply, but options were limited. Chen, you should stay with Wheeler, Jackson decided. Maintain the appearance of legitimate legal consultation. Diana, your choice. Your journalistic credentials might provide cover, or you can come with us. Diana didn't hesitate. I'm coming. If something happens, there needs to be a witness with no government connections. Frank simply checked his weapon, a compact pistol Jackson hadn't realized he was carrying. I'll take point. Old habits. They moved swiftly through the tunnel, emerging as promised in a small maintenance shed disguised as agricultural storage. The government SUV waited outside, nondescript and dust-covered, perfect for their needs. Frank retrieved the keys, while Jackson secured Sophia in the back seat with Diana. The duffel bags containing Raymond's evidence were loaded last, hidden under emergency equipment. As they pulled away, keeping to the maintenance road that wound through dense forest before connecting to a secondary highway, Jackson watched the rearview mirror for pursuit. Nothing yet, but the day was young. Where to? Frank asked from the driver's seat. A critical question. They needed a secure location, somewhere to regroup and reassess now that their previous plans had been compromised. The house, Sophia said suddenly from the back seat. Jackson turned to look at her. What? We should go back to the house. Raymond's house. Our house. Her expression was determined. That's where we're supposed to be. Sweetheart, it's not secure. They've already searched it once. But they didn't find the most important things, she insisted, and Raymond built it to protect his secrets. There are probably places we haven't even discovered yet. Jackson considered this. The house represented vulnerability, a known location, already compromised. But it also represented legitimacy, legal standing, and as Sophia suggested, possibly resources they hadn't yet identified. The girl might be right, Frank said quietly. Tactically, it's unexpected. They'll assume you'd avoid returning to a compromised position. And legally, it reinforces your claim to the property and custody. Abandoning it plays into their narrative. Diana leaned forward from the back seat. There's another consideration. Wheeler is now compromised as an ally, not necessarily by choice, but by circumstances. Whoever tracked us to the bunker has significant resources and reach. We need to consider the possibility that conventional authority channels may not be reliable. It was a sobering assessment, but aligned with Jackson's growing concerns. The corruption Raymond had documented hadn't simply vanished with time. It had evolved, embedded itself deeper into institutions and power structures. The house, Jackson decided, but we approached carefully. Full security protocols. Frank nodded, adjusting their route accordingly. They maintained communication silence, using back roads and indirect paths, stopping once to switch vehicles at a used car lot, where Frank apparently had prearranged access to alternative transportation, a battered pickup truck with Vermont plates and hunting decals. Less conspicuous than a government SUV in rural areas. By late afternoon, they had reached the vicinity of the house, stopping 2 miles away at an overlook that provided a clear view of the approach roads. Jackson used binoculars to scan the property. No vehicles visible, no obvious surveillance positions, no movement around the perimeter. Looks clear, he reported, but that means nothing if they're professionally positioned. Frank conducted his own assessment. No standard surveillance pattern visible. If they're watching, it's minimal presence, probably remote observation. Can we jam that? Possibly. Frank reached into his go bag, removing a small electronic device. Short-range signal disruptor, military grade, won't stop everything, but creates enough noise to complicate remote monitoring. They approached the house using natural cover, moving through wooded areas rather than the main drive. Jackson led Sophia, keeping her close, while Frank and Diana maintained distance to minimize visibility as a group. The signal disruptor hummed quietly in Frank's hand, broadcasting electronic interference across standard surveillance frequencies. The house stood as they had left it, dilapidated, imposing, secrets held within crumbling walls. No signs of recent entry were visible, But Jackson took no chances, conducting a thorough perimeter check before approaching the main entrance. Inside, the atmosphere felt different. Not the emptiness of an abandoned structure, but the quiet anticipation of a place that had witnessed history and awaited its resolution. Dust motes danced in late afternoon sunlight streaming through broken boards, creating patterns like code across the worn floorboards. Check everything, Jackson instructed. Any signs of disturbance? New surveillance. Tampering. They separated, each taking sections of the house. Sophia went directly to the library, her connection to that space evident in her purposeful stride. Jackson followed, watching as she immediately began examining the bookshelves, the desk, the fireplace with methodical attention. "The house feels different," she said without looking up from her inspection. "Like it's been waiting for us." Jackson understood what she meant. The oppressive emptiness had somehow transformed into expectant silence. The difference between abandonment and pause. "Nothing's been disturbed here," Sophia reported confidently. "The books I marked are still in the same positions." Smart girl, she'd created her own security system without telling him. Pride swelled briefly before being subsumed by the urgency of their situation. Frank returned from the upper floors. Clear above, no new entry points, no devices. Diana emerged from the kitchen area. Same in the back rooms. If someone's been here since your departure, they were extraordinarily careful. Jackson moved to the hidden room behind the library shelves, activating the mechanism. The panel slid open smoothly, revealing the space beyond. The floor panel concealing the trunk remained undisturbed, dust patterns intact. "They never found it," he murmured, relief evident. At least that had gone right. "Now what?" Diana asked, joining him in the hidden room. "We're back where we started, but with less time and more enemies." A fair assessment. The custody hearing loomed just days away. Wheeler's support was compromised. Unknown forces had tracked them to a classified facility. Options were dwindling. "We use what Raymond left us," Jackson decided. "Not just the evidence, but the house itself. Sophia's right. He built this place to protect his secrets. There may be resources here we haven't discovered." Frank nodded slowly. "Raymond was meticulous, forward-thinking. He wouldn't have left you a problem without also providing the means to solve it." They returned to the library where Sophia was already deep in concentration. Raymond's journals spread before her on the floor, her own notebook filled with the code patterns she'd been deciphering. "Dad, I think I found something," she said, looking up from her work. "These passages about contingency and insurance, they're not about the shadow protocols. They're about his personal insurance policy." Jackson knelt beside her, examining the journal entries she indicated. Phrases about secured leverage and evidence beyond recovery took on new meaning when viewed through this lens. He created a failsafe, Jackson realized, something separate from the main evidence cache. Something they wouldn't find even if they found the trunk, Sophia confirmed. "Look at this." She pointed to a sequence of numbers. "I thought these were just more book codes, but they don't match any of the patterns. They're too long, too specific." Jackson studied the numbers. Not book codes, not coordinates. Something else. Something... "Bank accounts," Frank said suddenly, looking over Jackson's shoulder. "Swiss format, old style. Numbered accounts from the 1970s. "Raymond had banking connections through the intelligence community," Diana noted. "He could have established secure holdings outside normal channels." Jackson considered the implications. Financial leverage. He wasn't just documenting the conspiracy, he was tracking the money. "Follow the money," Frank quoted the old investigative maxim, "always the most direct path to truth in conspiracies." Sophia flipped to another page in Raymond's journal. There's more. References to mirror archives and dead drop verification. I think he created duplicate evidence sets. The strategy made perfect sense for a man in Raymond's position. Never keep all leverage in one location, establish multiple redundant systems, ensure that any attempt to silence him would trigger revelations rather than conceal them. "If we can access these accounts, verify these additional evidence caches," Jackson began, "we'd have considerably more leverage in both the custody battle and the larger fight for Raymond's vindication," Diana finished. Frank was already examining the bank codes more closely. These would have changed formats over the decades, but the underlying accounts might still exist. I have contacts in European banking, people who understand discretion and historical accounts. Make the call, Jackson decided. We need to know what resources Raymond left in place. While Frank stepped outside to use the burner phone, Jackson continued working with Sophia to decipher more of Raymond's contingency plans. Diana organized the existing evidence, preparing both legal and media strategies depending on what developments emerged. Hours passed. Night fell over the old house, shadows deepening in corners and hallways. They worked by lantern light, the warm glow creating a strange intimacy in the decaying grandeur of the library. Sophia eventually dozed off on a makeshift bed of blankets near the fireplace, exhaustion finally overcoming her remarkable endurance. Frank returned, his expression a mixture of amazement and vindication. The accounts exist, dormant but intact, protected by special instructions that prevented standard inheritance procedures or government seizure. How much? Jackson asked. Millions. Decades of interest on initial deposits from the 1970s. But more importantly, access protocols that include secure storage facilities in Geneva, London, and Singapore. Raymond didn't just leave money. He left evidence in multiple international jurisdictions beyond the reach of even the most powerful American interests. It was a masterstroke of intelligence tradecraft. Raymond had created a dead man's switch on a global scale, insurance that would outlive him, awaiting activation by the right person at the right time. Diana looked up from her notes. This changes everything. With verified international accounts and documented evidence caches, we have legitimate financial standing and protective leverage. The custody case becomes winnable, Jackson realized, not just on emotional grounds, but on practical considerations. Financial stability, security, legacy. More than that, Frank added, the existence of these accounts validates Raymond's claims. These aren't the actions of a paranoid recluse. They're the carefully planned countermeasures of a professional intelligence officer protecting crucial information. A new path was emerging, not just defense against the Harringtons' attacks, but a proactive strategy to reclaim Raymond's legacy and secure Jackson and Sophia's future. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, Jackson felt the balance of power shifting in their favor. The following morning brought renewed purpose. They established secure communications with Chen, who had remained with Wheeler to maintain legal continuity. The congressman was proceeding with arrangements to provide testimony supporting Raymond's credibility and Jackson's custody claim. The security incident at the bunker had been officially recorded as a training exercise, but Wheeler's private assessment suggested it was a coordinated attempt to identify who had access to Raymond's evidence. Someone is very nervous, Chen reported. The Harringtons have suddenly requested a postponement of the custody hearing, citing new evidence requiring additional preparation time. They're stalling, Jackson realized. They know something has changed. Exactly. Judge Marks denied the request, which suggests she's not in their pocket. The hearing proceeds as scheduled. Another piece of good news. Jackson updated Chen on their discoveries regarding Raymond's international contingencies, providing enough detail for legal strategy without compromising operational security. With Frank's banking contacts working to verify and access Raymond's accounts, Jackson turned his attention to the house itself. Sophia's insight about Raymond building protection into the structure itself continued to resonate. What else had his father incorporated into this seemingly decrepit mansion? They began a methodical survey, measuring rooms, examining architectural features, comparing the actual layout to the blueprints they'd found in Raymond's files. Discrepancies emerged. A wall slightly thicker than structural requirements would dictate, a chimney larger than necessary for its fireplace, spaces between rooms that didn't quite account for the exterior dimensions. In the master bedroom, behind a wardrobe that had appeared immovable during their initial exploration, they discovered a shallow recess containing a steel lockbox. The combination matched the sequence they'd used on the trunk, 1776-53, American independence in Raymond's birth year. Inside was a folder containing property documents, architectural modifications, and most significantly, authentication codes for the Swiss accounts. Raymond had created multiple backup systems, ensuring that even if one cache was discovered, others would remain accessible. But the most valuable discovery came from Sophia, who had been examining the library fireplace with the focused attention she brought to all puzzles. She noticed that one of the hearthstones had a barely perceptible seam different from the mortar lines around the others. "Dad, I think this moves," she called, kneeling beside the massive stone fireplace. Jackson joined her, examining the stone she indicated. It appeared identical to the others, but when he applied pressure to one edge, he felt a slight give, a mechanical response rather than structural weakness. Working together, they identified the release mechanism, a specific sequence of pressure points that caused the stone to slide sideways, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside was a metal document tube, the kind used for protecting architectural drawings or sensitive papers. The tube contained a single folder labeled "Fail-Safe" in Raymond's precise handwriting. Jackson opened it carefully, conscious of Diana and Frank watching intently from across the room. Inside was a document unlike the others they'd found. Not intelligence reports or financial records, but a personal letter addressed to Osh, my son. Jackson's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the pages. "If you're reading this," Raymond had written, "then you found your way to the house and discovered enough of the truth to understand the stakes. I couldn't acknowledge you publicly, not because of shame, but because of danger. The men I exposed would have used you against me, would have targeted you as they targeted me. Your mother understood this. She agreed to the deception to protect you, to give you a chance at a life uncorrupted by the shadows I lived within. But I always watched over you, always made provisions for the day you might need the truth. The evidence I've gathered isn't just about national betrayal, it's about personal vendetta as well. Charles Harrington wasn't just a financier of treason. He was my friend once, my brother-in-arms in Vietnam, until he chose profit over patriotism. When I discovered his involvement in selling intelligence that led to the deaths of our comrades, he didn't deny it. He justified it as necessary for the greater good, for the shadow network that would save America from itself. When I threatened exposure, he didn't just attack my career. He threatened you and your mother. The choice was clear: my family or my truth. I chose you, retreated to this house, created the appearance of madness and disgrace while methodically documenting everything. Charles believed he had won, believed the threat neutralized. But I played a longer game. The final evidence against Harrington isn't in the trunk or the international accounts. It's in this folder, his personal confession, recorded during a confrontation at this house in 1981, transcribed and notarized by 3 separate attorneys, copies held in sealed escrow by each. He admitted everything, believing the recording destroyed afterward. It wasn't. This isn't just about justice for me, son. It's about justice for the 57 American soldiers who died because of intelligence compromised through Harrington's network. Men with families, with children who never knew why their fathers didn't come home. Use this carefully. Use it wisely. The Harringtons have built a dynasty on betrayal. Exposing this truth will destroy not just Charles, but potentially his entire family. Consider the innocent along with the guilty when you decide how to proceed. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved. Know that I loved you always, watched over you from afar, and prepared this legacy not from vengeance, but from belief that the truth, however delayed, serves the highest purpose of all: justice. With pride and love, your father, Raymond Wells. Attached to the letter was a sealed evidence packet containing a microcassette, notarized transcripts, and authentication documents establishing chain of custody. The final page was a photograph. Raymond holding an infant Jackson, smiling with unguarded joy, his mother beside them, a family briefly united before circumstances forced their separation. Jackson stared at the image, emotions crashing through him like artillery fire. Grief for what might have been, anger at the necessity of their separation, pride in Raymond's unwavering integrity, determination to complete what his father had begun. Diana broke the heavy silence. This is extraordinary. A direct confession from Charles Harrington, legally authenticated. This transcends historical interest. This is prosecutable evidence of conspiracy resulting in the deaths of American servicemen. There's no statute of limitations on that. Frank examined the documentation with professional assessment. The authentication is impeccable. Multiple witnesses, notarized statements, chain of custody verification. Raymond used every protocol in the intelligence handbook to ensure this would stand up to any challenge. It's not just evidence, Jackson said quietly. It's vindication. For Raymond, for the soldiers who died, for the truth itself. Sophia had been listening intently, absorbing the significance of their discovery. Now she spoke with the simple clarity children sometimes bring to complex moral questions. So Grandpa Raymond knew Mr. Harrington would try to hurt us if we found this. That's why he left all the other evidence first, to protect the most important truth until we were ready. Jackson nodded, struck by her insight. He created layers of revelation, each one leading to the next, each testing the resolve and integrity of whoever followed the path. He was making sure you were ready, she said simply, making sure you were strong enough to use it right. The wisdom in her observation humbled Jackson. Raymond had indeed constructed an elaborate test, not just of intelligence or perseverance, but of moral character. The evidence against Harrington wasn't just hidden, it was protected until the right person, with the right motivations, could decide its fate. That person was Jackson. That decision now lay before him. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following morning, with Chen's legal preparation, Wheeler's supporting testimony, and the financial stability now documented through Raymond's Swiss accounts. They had a strong case for maintaining Jackson's custody of Sophia. But the Harrington confession added a new dimension, a nuclear option that would destroy not just Charles, but potentially Vanessa and her entire family. We need to consider all implications, Diana cautioned. Using this confession publicly would create a media firestorm, investigations, possibly prosecutions. Sophia would be thrust into the center of a national scandal. But keeping it private means the men responsible for those soldiers' deaths never face justice, Frank countered. Raymond preserved this evidence for a reason. He also warned about considering the innocent along with the guilty, Jackson reminded them. Vanessa may be manipulative, but there's no evidence she knows about her father's activities. The ethical complexity was enormous. Justice for the dead soldiers and Raymond's reputation balanced against the potential collateral damage to innocence in the Harrington family, including potentially Sophia herself through association. They debated options late into the night, considering legal, ethical, and practical aspects of each potential approach. By morning, Jackson had reached his decision, one that honored Raymond's legacy while protecting Sophia's future. The courthouse in Burlington presented an imposing facade of Vermont granite and classical columns. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom where the custody hearing would take place maintained the atmosphere of serious legal tradition. Judge Eleanor Marks presided from the bench, a silver-haired woman with piercing eyes that suggested she missed nothing and tolerated no nonsense. Vanessa arrived with an entourage, her father Charles, her sisters, and a legal team comprising 3 attorneys and 2 paralegals. They occupied the left side of the courtroom with the confidence of people accustomed to deference. Jackson sat with Chen at the defense table, Sophia beside him. Diana occupied a seat in the public gallery, notebook ready. Frank remained outside, monitoring approaches to the courthouse for any suspicious activity. Charles Harrington's eyes locked on Jackson's as they waited for proceedings to begin. The older man's expression betrayed nothing, but something in his posture suggested tension beneath the carefully maintained veneer of aristocratic confidence. Judge Marks called the court to order with practiced efficiency. This is a hearing to review the custody arrangement for Sophia Hayes, currently awarded to her father, Jackson Hayes. I understand the plaintiff, Vanessa Harrington Hayes, is seeking modification of this arrangement based on concerns about living conditions and stability. Is that correct? Vanessa's lead attorney rose. Yes, Your Honor. We have documented serious concerns about the environment in which Mr. Hayes is raising the minor child, a dilapidated, potentially dangerous structure without proper utilities or amenities. We believe these conditions constitute endangerment under family welfare statutes. And Mr. Hayes's response? Judge Marks turned to Chen. Your Honor, we acknowledge the property requires a renovation, which is actively underway. However, we contend that these physical circumstances are temporary and vastly outweighed by the emotional stability and paternal relationship Mr. Hayes provides. Furthermore, we have documentation of financial resources dedicated to property improvement and the child's welfare. The initial arguments proceeded along expected lines. Vanessa's team presented photographs of the house's worst conditions, testimony from the CPS workers who had inspected the property, and expert opinions about potential health hazards from mold and structural deficiencies. Chen countered with evidence of Jackson's ongoing renovation efforts, Sophia's educational progress despite the circumstances, and most significantly, documentation of the Swiss accounts now verified and accessible, demonstrating financial stability beyond what had been previously disclosed during the divorce proceedings. This last revelation clearly surprised Vanessa's legal team, who requested a brief recess to consult. Judge Marks granted 15 minutes, during which the courtroom buzzed with low conversation. Diana approached the defense table during the break. Charles is on his phone in the hallway, looks concerned. I think the financial disclosure rattled him. Good, Chen replied. It undermines their primary argument about resource stability. When court resumed, Vanessa's attorneys shifted strategy, focusing on Jackson's military service and subsequent psychological evaluation, suggesting potential PTSD might affect his parenting capabilities. Your Honor, their expert witness testified, combat-related stress disorders can manifest in hypervigilance, emotional detachment, and difficulty maintaining normal social functions, all potentially detrimental to child development. Chen's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Winters, have you personally evaluated Mr. Hayes? No, I've reviewed his military records. Records from how long ago? Approximately 4 years. And in those 4 years, has Mr. Hayes demonstrated any behaviors consistent with your concerns? Any documented incidents? Any professional observations suggesting parental incapacity? I cannot speak to specific behaviors without direct evaluation. So your testimony is entirely speculative, based on statistical possibilities, rather than observed reality concerning this specific father-daughter relationship? The expert reluctantly conceded the point. When Congressman Wheeler took the stand as a character witness, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. His presence lent gravitas beyond what either side had anticipated. I've known of the Hayes family, particularly Raymond Wells, for decades through my father's military connections, Wheeler testified. Jackson Hayes exemplifies the integrity and commitment to principle that characterized his father. His decision to raise his daughter in modest circumstances, rather than surrender custody, speaks to prioritizing relationship over material comfort, a value judgment this court should respect. During cross-examination, Vanessa's attorney attempted to undermine Wheeler's testimony by suggesting political motivation. Wheeler's response was measured but firm. Congressman, isn't it true your committee has ongoing investigations that might benefit from Mr. Hayes' cooperation regarding his inherited property? My committee investigates matters of national security and intelligence oversight. Mr. Hayes' custody situation has no bearing on those professional responsibilities. I'm here because Raymond Wells was unjustly treated by our government, and I believe his son deserves better from our justice system. The attorney persisted. But you admit a professional interest in materials Mr. Hayes may have inherited? I have a professional interest in historical truth and accountability, counselor. Nothing more, nothing less. As the hearing progressed, Judge Marks maintained focused attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested she was processing arguments with independent assessment rather than being swayed by either side's presentation. The pivotal moment came when Sophia herself was called to speak with the judge in chambers, a standard procedure in custody cases to hear the child's perspective without the pressure of parental presence. While they waited, Jackson found himself directly across from Charles and Harrington in the hallway outside the courtroom. The older man's composed facade had deteriorated somewhat during the proceedings, but he maintained the confident bearing of someone accustomed to controlling outcomes. This is unnecessary, Hayes, Harrington said quietly. We could have reached an accommodation privately. Like the accommodation you offered Raymond, Jackson replied, keeping his voice equally low. Silence in exchange for reputation? Something flickered in Harrington's eyes. Recognition that Jackson might know more than previously assumed. Raymond made his choices. Choices have consequences. Yes, they do, Jackson agreed. For everyone. Before Harrington could respond, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. Sophia had returned from chambers, resuming her seat beside Jackson with quiet composure. Judge Marks studied her notes for several moments before addressing the court. I've heard extensive arguments regarding physical accommodations, financial resources, and psychological assessments. I've considered expert testimony and character witnesses. Most importantly, I've spoken with Sophia herself about her experiences, preferences, and understanding of her situation. The judge looked directly at the child. I find her to be remarkably perceptive, adaptive, and secure in her relationship with her father. Judge Marks turned her attention to the legal teams. Custody determinations must balance multiple factors with the child's best interest as the paramount consideration. Material comfort, while important, does not outweigh emotional security and parental bonding. Financial resources, while necessary, do not supersede genuine care and attention. She shuffled her papers briefly before continuing. Having considered all evidence and testimony, I find insufficient grounds to modify the existing custody arrangement. Mr. Hayes retains primary physical custody of Sophia with standard visitation rights for Mrs. Harrington Hayes. Relief washed through Jackson, matched by Sophia's small hand finding his under the table. Across the courtroom, Vanessa's expression hardened into barely contained fury, while Charles Harrington maintained a rigid poker face betraying nothing of his internal reaction. However, Judge Marks continued, I am establishing conditions regarding the living environment. Mr. Hayes will provide monthly progress reports on property renovation, with particular attention to structural integrity, utility function, and health safety standards. Child Protective Services will conduct quarterly inspections until the property meets all residential codes. Failure to demonstrate consistent improvement may result in reconsideration of this ruling. Reasonable conditions, entirely manageable given the resources now available through Raymond's accounts. Jackson nodded acceptance. Court is adjourned. The formality of the pronouncement belied the emotional impact. They had won. Sophia would remain with Jackson. The house would remain theirs. Raymond's legacy was secured in its most personal dimension. As they prepared to leave, Chen leaned close to Jackson. What about the Harrington evidence? The confession? Jackson watched Charles Harrington conferring urgently with his legal team, unaware that his decades-old betrayal was now documented in Jackson's possession. That's a separate matter, Jackson replied, one that requires careful consideration. Outside the courthouse, as autumn sunlight bathed the steps in golden light, Jackson knelt to Sophia's level. We did it, sweetheart. The house is officially our home now. Her smile illuminated her entire face. Can we fix it up like it used to be? Make it beautiful again? Absolutely. We'll restore everything, make it what Raymond always intended. Diana approached, notebook closed, her journalistic detachment momentarily set aside. Congratulations. A well-deserved outcome. Thank you for everything, Jackson told her sincerely. Your support made this possible. And the other matter? She asked quietly. Raymond's evidence? The confession? Jackson glanced toward the Harrington family emerging from the courthouse, Charles walking stiffly between his daughters, his expression grim. I've made my decision, Jackson said. Raymond left the choice to me for a reason. He trusted me to determine how justice would best be served. The following day, as morning mist rose from the valleys surrounding the old house on the hill, Charles Harrington's Mercedes navigated the winding driveway, coming to a stop before the porch steps. He emerged alone, surveying the property with the wary assessment of a man entering enemy territory. Jackson waited on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the older man's approach with calm readiness. Sophia remained inside with Frank, continuing her work deciphering Raymond's remaining journals. You requested this meeting, Harrington said without preamble as he reached the top step. I assume you have a proposal. Not a proposal, a decision. Jackson gestured to the chairs he'd arranged on the porch. You should sit. Harrington hesitated, then complied, his movements betraying the stiffness of age despite his attempts to project vigor. If this is about Vanessa's visitation schedule, it's not about Vanessa. It's about 57 American soldiers who died in Vietnam because of compromised intelligence. It's about Raymond Wells, whose reputation you destroyed to protect yourself. It's about a recorded confession you made in this house in 1981, believing all evidence destroyed afterward. The color drained from Harrington's face. For a moment, he seemed to age years before Jackson's eyes, the carefully maintained facade of power crumbling into the reality of an old man confronting long-buried sins. Raymond kept a copy, he whispered. Not a question, but a realization. Raymond kept everything, documented everything, protected everything until the right time. Jackson placed a folder on the small table between them. Your confession, authenticated, notarized, preserved in multiple secure locations, enough to trigger federal investigations, possible prosecution despite the years past, certain destruction of the Harrington legacy. Harrington stared at the folder, not touching it. What do you want? Money? Position? Name your price. I don't want anything from you. I already have everything I need. My daughter, this house, Raymond's vindication. Confusion crossed Harrington's features. Then why am I here? Why show me this if not to negotiate? Jackson studied the man who had caused so much damage, whose actions had separated him from his father, whose ambition had prioritized power over patriotism. There was no satisfaction in seeing Harrington's fear, only a somber recognition of the weight of consequence. You're here so you understand exactly what's happening and why. I'm not going to expose your confession publicly. Harrington's expression shifted to cautious relief, then immediate suspicion. You expect me to believe you'd simply forgive treason? Not forgiveness, justice of a different kind. Jackson opened the folder, revealing not just the confession documents but additional pages, legal instruments, financial directives, institutional arrangements. You're going to establish a foundation in Raymond's name, dedicated to supporting the families of intelligence officers killed in action. $50 million initial endowment, ongoing funding from Harrington Family Holdings. Harrington's eyes widened. That's extortion. That's restitution for the families who lost fathers, husbands, sons because of your actions. You'll also release a public statement acknowledging Raymond's professional contributions and integrity, citing recently discovered evidence vindicating his research and conclusions. And if I refuse, then the confession goes to the FBI, the Justice Department, and every major news organization simultaneously. Your choice, legacy redefined or legacy destroyed. Harrington stared at Jackson, calculating, measuring, assessing the resolve behind the ultimatum. You're remarkably like him, you know. Raymond had the same unyielding quality. I admired it even as I fought against it. He was my father. Yes, I knew that, of course. It's why I opposed your relationship with Vanessa from the beginning. I feared exactly this moment. Raymond's son uncovering what Raymond himself had discovered. Jackson pushed the folder closer to Harrington. Your signature on these documents by the end of the week. Public announcement of the foundation within 30 days. Full funding verified by independent auditors. And that ends it? The confession remains sealed? Conditional on your compliance and ongoing funding of the foundation. Any attempt to undermine these arrangements activates the release protocols Raymond established. Harrington took the folder finally, his hands not entirely steady. He always was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Even from the grave, he understood people, understood that given the choice between public humiliation and private restitution, men like you would choose the latter. And the families of those soldiers, don't they deserve to know the truth about how their loved ones died? They deserve support, recognition, and respect for their sacrifice. The foundation will provide that without destroying more lives through a public scandal. Justice doesn't always require destruction, Harrington. Sometimes it requires reconstruction. The older man nodded slowly, a grudging respect visible beneath his resignation. I underestimated you, Hayes, as I underestimated Raymond. A family tradition, apparently. Harrington rose to leave, the folder clutched in his hand. At the steps, he paused, looking back at the house with an expression Jackson couldn't quite interpret. Regret, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of defeat. Raymond loved this place, said it represented something permanent in an impermanent world. I never understood his attachment to it. You will, Jackson replied. When the Raymond Wells Foundation operates from these grounds, restored to their original condition, hosting the families of fallen intelligence officers, you'll understand exactly what this house means. After Harrington departed, Jackson remained on the porch, watching the morning light strengthen across the overgrown grounds. The weight of decisions settled around him. Not the path of maximum vengeance Raymond might have expected, but perhaps the path of maximum justice he would have respected. The door opened behind him. Sophia emerged, bearing her notebook and a mug of hot chocolate. She settled into the chair Harrington had vacated. "Is it over?" she asked simply. "One chapter is, others are beginning." She nodded, understanding more than her years would suggest. "Grandpa Raymond would be proud of you. You chose the hard way." "The hard way?" "Making something good instead of just punishing something bad. That's harder." Jackson smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "I read a lot," she replied with a small grin. "And I listen, especially when grown-ups think I'm not paying attention." Together they sat in comfortable silence, watching the world awaken around their home, for it was truly their home now, not just legally but spiritually, a place reclaimed from decay and secrets, a legacy redeemed rather than merely inherited. Inside, Diana and Frank were organizing the evidence that would rebuild Raymond's reputation among intelligence professionals. The formal acknowledgement from Charles Harrington would open doors previously sealed, allowing the truth to emerge gradually into historical record. Raymond's contributions finally recognized by the community that had once abandoned him. But that was professional vindication. Here on this porch, with his daughter beside him and his father's house surrounding them, Jackson felt the more personal vindication, the completion of a circle begun decades earlier when Raymond had chosen to protect his son by staying away. Now that son had protected Raymond's legacy by revealing selective truths while containing destructive ones. "What happens next?" Sophia asked, sipping her chocolate. Jackson put his arm around her shoulders. "We rebuild. The house, our lives, Raymond's legacy. We make something worthy of what he entrusted to us. Something permanent in an impermanent world," she quoted softly. "Exactly." As if in response, the house settled around them with a gentle creaking of ancient timbers, not the ominous sounds of decay they had first encountered, but the comfortable adjustment of a structure, finding new purpose, new life, new meaning after years of patient waiting. The forgotten inheritance had been found, not just in documents and evidence, but in blood and bone, in truth and principles, in the unbreakable connections between father and son, grandfather and granddaughter, past and future. The house on the hill stood watch over it all, its windows catching the morning light like eyes opening after a long sleep, ready at last to witness the next chapter in a story decades in the writing. And in that moment of quiet connection between past and future, Raymond Wells's legacy found its truest expression not in vengeance or exposure, but in the continuation of what he had valued most: truth, justice, and family, preserved against all odds for generations yet to come.